No, no, not coming through. Do you need to restart your computer or something? Because it's probably not both your mics. I don't know if you're on computer or phone or what, but probably try restarting it, then look into the settings. Yeah, we'll see you back. Um, you know, right? I would kind of also frame this as trading short-term, instant gratification measures for the long term, which are, I mean, it depends. Obviously, there's a lot of variables. What exactly are we talking about? But there's a lot of, as you described, effects we don't see when we're making the decision,
Mhm.
right? So I know
Yeah,
this would be, no,
the
go on.
egalitarian world is very much predicated on high time preference. It's the, I want it now, and feeding into, yeah, oh, you want something, you don't have to work for it, you can just vote for it, and we'll get it for you now. And then how that happens is somebody else's problem, right?
Right.
So it's very much this kind of Faustian bargain that, um, yeah, that people think that they could just have things in the immediate, and that short circuits the ability to have long term thinking and understanding the genuine costs of having those things.
Right. Right. Which, sometimes comes with wisdom, right? I didn't know about the butterfly effect, right? That this
Mhm.
action would lead to this consequence, and then that one would lead to this consequence, and next thing you know, you're in a fucking ditch, right? Like, oh shit. So, I mean, there's many different nuances we could talk about, but I'll just bring up, for instance, birth control, right? On the topic
Mhm.
that we were just talking about, kind of
Right.
related here. So, the downstream effects for women long term. And here's the thing, forget about, I mean, here's where I'm going to come from it at. Forget about science and statistics and all this stuff, which has validity. I'm not going to take it away. But if
Mhm.
you were to just look at it as right or wrong in the sense of the power being put upon the woman and the power that she can then exercise. And what
Mhm.
I mean by that is that she that this woman is having her body change to the extent that she won't be able to, right, have a, get pregnant. And what must be happening for that natural, act of, otherwise act of God to now be blocked, or 99.8% blocked, right? And then
Yep.
meanwhile, now she has the power to go out and indulge in those instant gratifications for whatever means that it actually means to her, whether it's the hubris or she just a real dude and she trying to up her body count, whatever the case. But the effects of it, when you look at it, without even the stats, right, without even the lawsuits and, may cause malaria, your tits might fall off, all this shit. If you just look at it in a simplistic form, is it right or wrong? it it seems to me it's just plain wrong.
Yeah, I mean, even before this was invented, Oswald Spengler also pointed out that as soon as procreation is a choice, that heralds the end of that civilization. And the way that this seems to play
Hmm.
out, and that we're witnessing it now, is for both men and women. Uh, they usually don't choose to have a child, but then when they find themselves in that circumstance, they tend to rise to the occasion. Suddenly the hormones or the mental changes in the woman take over, and she will act very differently than beforehand. And men too, that
Right.
men tend to be reckless or wild, and then they realize they're having a kid, and they'll tell you that, yeah, that suddenly their whole mental frame changes and their child becomes the center of their world instead of themselves. And again, they kind of rise to the occasion. But neither of them would have chosen that until it happened to them. And again, I think this is the danger of making individual choice or consent the highest good, is because people don't choose to take on the responsibilities that once that greatness is thrust upon them, they think it's the best thing that ever could have happened to them. But they have to get over that hurdle rate to see it that way. And if they don't, they're stuck in this kind of perpetual adolescence
Yeah.
that they
Yeah.
never choose to do that. And maybe that's really good for the managerial elite because it makes us consume more products, or
Right.
it is good for the people who own the big businesses to hit their targets for their bottom line or whatever.
Right.
But it's probably not healthy or sustainable for society. And I think that's why, yeah, it's like Chesterson's fence. even if we don't know why it's there, maybe we shouldn't get rid of it until we find out why it went up in the first place.
Yeah. And on the Machine Wise channel, we were talking with him, Leroy and I, yesterday, and I think the day before. So I don't mean to sum him up wrong. I think this is pretty accurate. He is against the acceleration of technology. I think he would co-sign that, as that's his viewpoint. And I think he makes a lot of valid points. I mean, as to your point, right? Like, electricity is not necessarily the devil. It's not that we should all become Amish and, ditch cellular communication and computers. But, when I kind of step back and think about it, what else do we need when it comes to technology? What else would improve our life? And the answer is a resounding nothing. And I mean nothing at all. Given that right now we have a world, a country in the US, you're in the US, right?
Yep.
Yep. Where we're having so many problems that didn't exist. I mean, granted, a lot of them did exist 100 years ago, but many of them did not.
It's like a monkey's paw, right? You're wishing for one thing, and then, you get all the side effects with it. And is the cure worse than the disease?
Right. And it seems oftentimes it is, especially with the things that are just emphatic, right? They're the 10 million view in an hour shit. Just it's exciting and explosive and it's a game changer. And meanwhile, it's often very fucking bad. I mean, to the core.
Yeah, the whole supernormal stimulation phenomenon, of which again is Uncle Ted's point, as well as yes, we act on technology as a tool, but then also how does the technology act on us and change our behavior, and are we being conscious about that process? Frank Herbert's kind of having a renaissance now with the Dune movies being out, and that was the same thing he was concerned with. Is yes, you have technology or you act in an environment, but then that environment is also acting on you. And what does that feedback loop look like? And that kind of complex thinking. Most people don't take the time to do that if people are watching 5-second TikToks, and that's just what they're addicted to as a mental stimulus.
So I'm going to give it to Leroy in a second, but I just want to follow up with real quick. So it seems that Machine Lies, I saw his debate with Andrew Wilson. I saw the whole thing. And one of his premises is that technology is actually in charge of people. People are not in charge of technology. And there's some interesting nuance to that, right? But I want to leave it right there. And what's up, Leroy? Your mic back?
I'm using a different mic. Can you hear me just fine?
Is this a third one?
I'm actually using my cam mic this time. I've never used it before, so I'm a bit dodgy about it. I'm going to replace my mic pretty soon anyway. I need to get one so I'm not breathing on it and shit.
Cool.
But hey, I missed quite a lot of that. Fucking.
Yeah, we're just getting into it.
Yeah. Good shit. I hope everyone's well and all that shit. Happy Sunday.
Yeah.
Cheers for coming along, Sean. I'm pretty interested to hear your positions on many things. I've seen you on quite a few shit. So I'm sure you've got a wide opinions on many things, so I'm ready to get stuck into it and hear what you have to say, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on as well. You stare into the abyss, and does the abyss stare back into you? And I think that is the issue with technology, that, again, as I was saying before, I think we have to take that breather of I'm sure there are things that have not yet been developed that we could do. I wonder if actually maybe people feel like we're in that dead end because of that sort of short-term thinking, that very few people have the attention span to look at a bigger scale or bigger issues of things that might actually be helpful. I have kind of noticed that, as a business owner and kind of dealing with how the culture has changed so much in the past 10 to 20 years, with younger generations who grew up, who never knew a world before the internet. Being a Gen Xer is kind of this, I get to see both sides of that. There is this odd impression of like it's impossible to build a better mousetrap, that and everybody is just 100% focused on marketing as a result. So you have influencer culture and personal brands, which is, 15 years ago, if you told somebody you had a personal brand, they'd look at you like you were crazy. But a lot of that is driven by this mentality in the younger generations of, well, anything that ever could be invented, it would be put on the internet, and then everybody would know about it instantaneously, and everybody would adopt it. So this idea that you're going to get an edge in the marketplace by inventing something new, they look at you like they really don't think that's possible. Which, I mean, people said that at the beginning of the 20th century, right? That everything that can be invented has been invented, and then that was right before television and airplanes and rockets and landing on the moon and computers. So clearly there's things there. I think it's just a result of, again, that high time preference society that democracy and egalitarianism promotes. Is when the founding fathers conducted an armed insurrection against the British Empire, the way they were able to think these things through and make arguments in the Federalist Papers was they had to sit down by candlelight and write it out with a feather and actually get their thoughts together. They weren't, shooting out a tweet while taking a shit. They had to actually think things through a little bit more. So
reading a tweet is like taking a shit. Just to put that out there.
I mean, at the same time, I'm very glad that there is now effective opposition to journalism and academia as the cathedral are really the agenda setting function in society. Instead of state controlled media, we have a media controlled state. So Trump basically tweeted himself into the White House, which is why everybody freaked the fuck out. And suddenly the internet went from free speech absolutist to suddenly people were getting deplatformed. So there's good things about this too. I'm not here to hate on the internet or technology. I mean, we're streaming live as a result. Yeah. But it's the thought process. I think to just be a little more self-aware about that feedback mechanism. And again, I think that's going to be the new trend. I think we're going to pause and say, okay, what do we actually want a civilization to look like? And for different people, it's going to look in different ways too. And I think we're going to see a lot of self-sorting mechanism with that as well.
Yeah, I would say part of the problem with that is competition between other nations. So if we're not doing it and they're doing it, fuck, we better do that now to catch up. So I would say that's one of the biggest pressures there. So you could say that, people might start realizing that we need to slow down, but the higher ups will make us go faster and push harder because they're threatened by other nations doing exactly the same thing.
That's Bertrand de Juvenal's argument in On Power and his explanation for why every country is going towards what he calls the total state, right? That everything, which is a big part of why they want atomization and deracination and eliminating the family, because it creates split loyalty with the state, that if every social interaction has to be mediated through the state, they have fine-grained control over how people act. And to your point, that even if they're like, oh, this is a bad idea, they're going to look at, well, China's doing it, so we got to do it. And they feel like they're trapped by that paradigm, that Thucydides trap.
Well, I hear you, but that's also, when you say they, referring to government, right? Like our government is worried that we don't want another government to get ahead. That's when you're saying they.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification. Yes and no. So at the same time, I would try to be a little more precise of the managerial elite, right? Which is both the administrative state, so the people who are running all those 3- and 4-letter agencies, and then they also are the same people who went to the same schools and joined the same clubs as the CEOs or C-suite of all of publicly traded companies as well. There's really, so my forthcoming book gets into this. There's no functional difference between management of a publicly traded company and a bureaucrat in an administration of the government. This whole idea of government versus private is a red herring.
I agree. I agree very much. I work for an ISP, and it's the federal government. I don't care what you say. It is the federal fucking government.
Yep.
It just has a different name tag on.
Right, between the FCC or FTC, who's regulating them,
right?
The fact that their stock is regulated by the SEC, they're all in bed with each other, and the people who were in those positions of power all went to the same schools and were indoctrinated in the same way of thinking about how things have to be run. Right. That it may not be a formal conspiracy where they all meet on Epstein's Island and decide what's going to happen this year, but because they all think the same way, they're all going to. And they can take a hint, hey, your job depends on you acting right. Well, they're going to figure out what acting right is in that context.
Yeah. What up, Glenn? How you doing, man?
What up? How you guys doing?
Good,
Very
good.
well, thank you.
We're just cracking some eggs, scrambling. I don't know. Some egg
There's a
joke.
metaphor in here somewhere.
Yeah,
Some stuff.
some kind of fucking Easter joke. I don't know.
Well, there you go.
So you said your fourth book, Sean?
Forthcoming. Yeah. It's so yeah, it's on. So a lot of, I think it's very well-worn territory with, say, libertarians of, the problems with central banking, the problems with income tax, kind of all those stereotypical lines. The missing third leg of the tripod that I think is severely overlooked is publicly traded securities. That the rise of the managerial state or administrative state is very much built on the creation of publicly traded markets, crowding out privately owned, largely family businesses. That's how, again, going back to the short time horizon, high time preference phenomenon, it's very much like in the Soviet Union, you had the nomenclatura, right? The people who were taking over particular agencies within the government. They didn't really care about whether the government worked in the long run or whether their agency even did what it was supposed to do. Sort of like Cornell's iron law of bureaucracy as well. But they're there for a temporary amount of time. They're interested in preserving their own career, getting that golden parachute. And all these publicly traded companies, because ownership is diluted, the decision making actually happens in that managerial C-suite, but they're not invested in something that's going to last decades or centuries. They know that, hey, after 10, 15 years of that job, they're going to retire and get paid in a big equity stake. And the way that's done is through the IPO mechanism. And that's really the agreement between the managers and the government of, that's how you're going to buy into their, it's like joining the Communist Party in a communist country. That's how you get the buy-in or selling out to, okay, you're now one of them as opposed to the rest of us.
Yeah. We've been kind of discussing different topics in this world, the YouTube world and outside, where there's a lot of melting of things. I mean, that's how I'm framing it, right? Things are melting or bleeding into other things. One easy example is, at this rate, we're all going to be fucking unis, right? Men and women are going to go extinct. There's just going to be hermaphrodites everywhere. That's the rate that we're going based on the social conditions, the altering of bodies, this type of thing. Obviously, I'm not getting into the sustainability of that, or, I don't think that would work very well. But I'm just saying that seems to be the direction we're going, and it's a terrible one. Now, if we peel it back a layer, well, what is the issue? I mean, there's many issues, but in particular, that we're having a sensitivity issue to distinguishing groups, starting at the man-woman, right? We can't distinguish what a man is, can't distinguish what a woman is, and furthermore, we don't want to, because it might hurt someone's feelings if you call them a woman or a man, whatever, and then it gets into race, right? The social mechanisms, all these different movements where it almost seems like, no, we want what you have, we want to be you, and everything bleeding into each other.
Right.
I think it's a very bad thing. It's like you take all the Play-Doh and you mix it all the fuck up, right? You get some brown or gray. I don't know.
Well, so because that's the power struggle, right? The circulation of elites. Christopher Caldwell wrote Age of Entitlement, that basically the Civil Rights Act of 1964 became a replacement informal constitution, sort of like how the United Kingdom has an unwritten constitution. And that's where all the power is, right? So the reason you see these outcomes is because people who don't have skills or competency, what Spandrel over at Bloody Shovel called bio-Leninism, this is how they can get power instead. It's why people go into politics. It's why they, I'd argue even like trade unions or political parties. It's where instead of having merit, they rely on loyalty and favor trading to accumulate power. And yeah, you're eating the seed corn, but they don't care. They just have a deep-seated sense of resentment that they know they're not good enough, and they're going to, they're going to buck the system. Again, this is the promise of egalitarianism or liberalism in general is, you're low on the totem pole in the natural order. Well, do this thing that sabotages society and makes us dysfunctional, but at least you'll be, king of the ashes. You'll be the top of shit hill. And people are happy to take that Faustian bargain, especially when, they know they don't have other alternatives because they're not that great of people.
So I want to give it up to one of these fine gentlemen below me. Not fine in that way, it's not gay. But look, one thought.
Clipping that.
Yeah, clip me up. We got so much clip-worthy shit, especially on Sarah's stream. We had some.
Oh yeah.
Gold.
So, anyways, looking at how society operates so superficially, right? We talked about materialism, right? Everything is how it looks. It's so much more of the form over function.
Yep.
And so I don't know why this video popped up today. I think it was a short or something, but anyways, it was a woman who was, I guess you would say, very deformed. I don't know how else to put that. That's what she was. I have no idea how old she was. I don't know if she was 30 or 40. But anyway, she seemed very nice, and obviously don't know somebody in 2 minutes of watching their YouTube video. But nonetheless, she had some pretty, effed up comments, like, did she get plastic surgery? Just people kind of digging her. And I'm pretty against that. I mean, we all make mistakes, but at the end of the day, I don't think, doing that into a woman and she's disfigured and it's from birth, I just don't think that's good, period. But anyways, my point is this. It seems, again, it's in the context of this 2-3 minute video, but it seems that she's really become as good as one could hope to be inside her frame, her person, considering her condition, because it is very noticeable. I mean, it is very noticeable. I'm sure people point and laugh and this type of thing in public right in front of her. So, anyways, one thing that came to mind in as she was talking is all the differences that we have, flaws that we see in ourselves, right, in our own selves or people around us even, which sometimes is easier to notice, right? But these flaws are a lot of times good things as well, for different reasons that you might not even think about. I don't know if this is the best example, but given the woman I was just telling you about, perhaps her looking the way she does really helped her become what seemed to be, from this little context, a very good, nice woman. And granted, you could say she can't rely on her beauty. That, well, it is what it is. But I'm saying in a good way too, she can't rely on her beauty. You see what I mean?
So going on that, I mentioned this the other day. Oh, this doesn't even work. I mentioned this the other day. My missus, she works with a gentleman. I've got him up here in front of me. He was born without arms and legs, but he is a lawyer, a speaker, a father, an artist, and a Paralympian. My girlfriend said, or my missus said that he's one of the most inspirational people that she's ever met. And he feels like he has no limits. Nothing can stop him. And that's, again, a man that's obviously realized that the hardships are in front of him. And he just tackles every single one of them and plows forward.
Right.
Yep.
But how do we teach that to other people? How can other people embody what he is?
Well, the woman I'm describing to you, I would argue, well, who knows what other people are thinking, but I would guess that she has affected other people by putting these videos out. And look, I've seen women do all sorts of videos in the guise of like, oh, poor me, but it's really an intention thing. I didn't get that vibe or whatever from this. So it seemed very genuine. Was it or not? I don't know. I'm not God. But it seemed very genuine. And I'm guessing, I would have to educatedly guess, she is doing that, what you're saying, right? By virtue of sharing it in a sense, that she's inspiring other people who thought, right? I mean, look, I'm sure we've all had women around us who maybe, I don't know, their nose was a little off or whatever. It doesn't matter, right? They had some flaw that they were very insecure about, or maybe multiple. And when they look at this woman, I don't know if they're going to pick it up in particular, but it can be like, damn, if she can handle it like this, what am I complaining about? Right? Like, mine is nothing compared to this.
Yeah. So realistically, their positive attributes are actually their crutch, because they rely on something very superficial.
Exactly. Right? Even something that you're very good at from birth. We all have things we're not kind of inclined to do, or we are, based on, not to get too scientific, but the genealogy, your parents, and then the actual circumstances, the environment growing up, right? So the environmental versus the innate factors in you. And these, good things, these right unfair advantages oftentimes can stunt a person because they never had to work at whatever it is, right? I'm sure there's examples we could throw out, but just generally.
I mean, the hedonic treadmill seems to be the problem of our age as well. I've never seen more people complain that they're bored or depressed. And so much of this seems to be that they've never had any challenges. They've never, they don't think that being homeless or starving is something that they could actually encounter because they believe they're going to have a million different safety nets from, family or the government or what have you. That,
right.
That if you're not testing what you're made of and they almost crave that, right? Like people were thinking of themselves as heroes because they were brave and going to the grocery store during the lockdown when everybody thought the virus was the next Spanish flu. And people actually kind of got off on that. Like, oh, suddenly my life has meaning again. I have to do something that I'm perceiving as dangerous. And so that's also this Faustian bargain with managerialism of give us your power and we'll make you happy. Except that happiness is fleeting and more anesthetizing. Happiness is fool's gold. What people actually want is power. It's the power process more than they just want happiness. And it's a bad trade-off. And I think people don't quite realize why it's working out that way, but they're definitely feeling those emotional side effects of that. I mean, all anybody talks about anymore is that people lack purpose or they lack motivation or they have no strong sense of identity. It's like people are completely, it's like a Brave New World mindset where, but people aren't even given that programming of I'm an alpha or I'm a beta or a gamma or whatever. They're just kind of left to, that all their needs are met, but they don't have any outlet for their desires or risk or to put themselves in any kind of danger because of safetyism has turned everything into bubble wrap.
Right. With right, what is it? With more security, you'll have less freedom. I mean, essentially, right, inverse relationship. But when you were talking about that with the lockdown, I was thinking like this fucking, I don't know, just like this lazy, nerdy gamer dude, living in his parents' and he's driving to the grocery store like, you know what? I'm a fucking badass now.
Which goes to show that, I mean,
lockdown. I don't even
some
have my
level,
mask.
He needed that, right? And he's been denied any opportunity to express that. Now, maybe it would have been better if, I don't know, he's thrown in the woods and had to figure out how to camp for the night or something, but something a little more substantive. Right. But nevertheless, that psychological need is there. And again, industrial society in its future, despite the horrific way that was originally disseminated, really hit the nail on the head about what modernity does to people.
You've been quiet, Glenn. Glenn, you've been quiet.
I'm soaking this all in.
All right.
I'm waiting for my moment. Don't worry.
I got the spotlight on you.
In your worldview, then, what is the way forward?
That's a good question. I'm still working on that. I wish I could say, I know the answer, and it's this, and this. Right. What really has been preoccupying me lately is how to raise capital to fund projects that would put a lot of the autistic engineers that we know who want that purpose, and they also want the ability to afford owning a home, affording to date, affording to get married and have children and household formation. But because we also live in this world where everything is marketing and style over substance, asset bubbles have crowded out real profit and capital expansion. So figuring out how to have that, whether it's the based fund or like Peter Thiel's Founders Fund, something to actually bootstrap productive capital. I think that's both necessary just from an economic standpoint that this bond bubble or asset bubble scenario we've been in is not long for this world. Public securities in general, and there's a demographic crisis with boomers retiring. The whole idea of like 401ks and IRAs, ERISA passed since 1974. Right. A lot of that was to absorb inflation from going off the or closing the gold window completely around 1971. And now they're withdrawing instead of contributing. So the chickens are coming home to roost. And I think demographically, it's not as there's going to be some kind of liquidity crisis. We always fight the last battle. So everybody's expecting a 2008, like, oh, the market plunges 40%.
Yeah.
I don't, nobody has a crystal ball, but my hunch is more along the lines of a liquidity problem or liquidity trap more than falling prices. I think the intervention is too strong and the boomers are too dependent on that asset bubble for what they've been sold as their retirement income. Yeah. So the big danger, like if you think during a hurricane and a case of bottled water, when you have anti-gouging laws that say, well, you know, even though supply is limited and demand is a lot higher because it's an emergency, it's a hurricane, you're not allowed to charge $50 a case for what would normally be $10 a case for water, because that's gouging and that's immoral. Well, what happens is it all sells out in a flash, and now you really need that water and you're willing to pay $50, you can't. So you can't get water at any price. That's more the scenario I think we're going to see from publicly traded markets. It's not so much a crash in prices as much as that market makers are not going to be able to close that bid-ask spread, and people are not going to be able to get, you know, sell their shares to get money more or less at any price. That system of expecting market depth just won't function anymore. We take that for granted.
Well, look, even I mean, I realize you weren't, or at least I don't think you were involving cash, like actual cash in that equation. But given what I understand about fractional banking last time I was kind of into this, and I'm not really at this point, but I assume it's the same, there's not nearly enough cash to cover if everyone was to pull out even half tomorrow. Like there would be it doesn't exist. So I realize that wouldn't happen, but nonetheless.
I also, again, think that, central banking and fractional reserve, that's all certainly part of it. But I think that kind of gets overplayed. And it's more of a red herring. And the more significant issue is Richard Werner has brought this up. He studied Japan's bubble and burst, which, of course, in America replicated. Now the catchphrase is financial repression for this, but real short summary. You're always going to have soft money as soon as money gets used. Basically, anytime anybody owes money to anybody else, it's no longer as hard as if it's like the gold standard or cash or Bitcoin or whatever.
Yeah, I got you.
So credit creation is inevitable. The real question is not so much about the credit creation itself or even how much per se. It's about what it goes into. And credit really can go into three places. It can go into consumption, which is the version of inflation that everybody worries about, that milk becomes $100 a gallon or wheelbarrows full of money like Weimar Republic, right?
Right.
Governments have kind of learned that lesson, and they figured out how to engineer the scenario to not replicate that. But what they've done is the other two options are into asset bubbles, so shares of stock, real estate, speculating on things. And then the third is investing in companies that then figure out a more efficient way of doing something that then, because you're doing more with less, yes, you have inflationary pressure by extending that credit, but normally how that gets balanced out is the deflationary pressure of figuring out a more efficient way of doing things. But that has been completely crowded out by asset bubbles. And that's the way that, the perception of inflation has been contained, especially for the past 20 years. But it's not in a productive asset. It's purely just number goes up on paper. So if you look at the S&P 500 for the past 30 years, and if you bought in the 90s, you look like you're doing great. Or same with real estate or whatever. And they need to keep that bubble going because basically due to ERISA and 401ks and IRAs, the largest and most influential generation, the baby boomers, have their whole retirement tied up in this social experiment, which has never been done before their generation. I mean, any of the previous generations they didn't save in an IRA, right? This was all more or less invented in the mid 70s and then actually got going in the early 80s. So they're not willing to allow those assets to deflate, but it also means that all this capital is tied up and unable to go into things that are actually useful. Something like 30% of S&P 500 companies are zombie capital, which means that they haven't been profitable in like a decade. So that's really more the issue. And I think that that's a big part of why, Peter Thiel and Tyler Cohen call it the Great Stagnation. I often compare it to the Brezhnev stagnation in the Soviet Union. After Stalin, Khrushchev came in and said, okay, we got to de-Stalinize. That was a little too crazy. We need to get some reforms put through because things are not working so hot. And he tried some reforms, and it kind of pissed off a lot of the entrenched powers in that bureaucracy. They didn't like those changes, and a lot of them, frankly, didn't work out. So eventually he was ousted by Brezhnev, and Brezhnev basically said, we can't fix this. This is as good as it's going to get. We're just going to keep things this way and ride it out. And you talk to people who were living in the Soviet Union in that era, and they kind of describe it as their golden age. Like, yeah, things were bad, and you would show up to your job at the toothbrush factory drunk because there was no hope of ever doing anything better, and it was mind-numbing. You had to do that every day until you died. But you also weren't worried about losing your job or where food was coming from or affording rent or anything either. So it's just kind of this weird stasis. I think we're in our version of that. And you see it also in, like I was talking about, the younger generations. They don't really feel a fear of negative consequences from, oh, if I don't work my ass off, I'm going to be homeless and starving and die in a gutter alone. But they also know that there's no point in being loyal to a company or working hard and trying to prove that you're great, because it's never going to be rewarded. So they do just the bare minimum to get by. Yeah. And that creates the stasis. They call it, lying flat or let it rot or quiet quitting. But whatever it is, you're not getting any innovation or improvement on the one end, but you're also not getting any failure on the other. And I think that's a big part of the dysfunction that we're
playing it safe in a way, in a sense. Right?
Yeah. And which leads to boredom, hopelessness, lack of direction. People feel like they don't even know what their potential is.
Well,
because
lack of purpose.
Right.
Right. I mean,
now, what would need to change in the job market to increase productivity amongst the employees? Now, what some would say, and this is where a lot of people will go back to like the traditionalist view and be like, well, get women out of the workforce, then you would have more income, give the men that would increase more enthusiastic productivity, or, it would just, the labor force is so spread out there, they can always be replaceable. So employers don't really have an incentive to care enough about their employees' satisfaction. But you're not going to get all the women out of the workforce. So then what is the real solution?
Yeah, again, I do wish I had all the answers and could say, oh, we just got to do X, Y, and Z and everything.
We're going to get them tonight, Sean.
Yeah, well, we'll figure it out here. I don't know that we need any immigration. I think that's kind of a good place to start is, hey, let's put a freeze and figure out our own problems before we bring in a bunch of replacement people. I think those kinds of experiments of, could you have private organizations where, they don't hire women and find a way to get around the labor laws or eschew them in a way that's compliant. I think figuring out the experimentation of how to do that. The big problem too is also, again, that the credit regime as it exists supports asset bubbles at the expense of productive capital. On the other end is we have this competency crisis, right? So because because of DEI and ESG, Boeing airplanes are falling out of the sky, right? Oh, the hatches are missing half the bolts because the people we hired don't give a shit, or they got the job because they're not the most qualified person, but because they met some other regulatory requirement. Which is, again, very reminiscent of the Brezhnev stagnation in the Soviet Union. There was no reinvestment. And it got to the point that the agricultural equipment was getting so decrepit, and really the Soviet Union never recovered from collectivization of the farming. That's why they had, factory workers would have to go work summer jobs in the fields just to try to maintain food levels. And eventually they developed a dependency of buying grain on the open market in exchange for oil exports, which then by the time Reagan came into power, was able to work a deal with Saudi Arabia to fill the world with an oil glut, which crashed their prices. And suddenly they couldn't afford to import grain because they didn't have any hard currency on the international market. And that's where we got the bread lines and Gorbachev in the 80s of eventually they gave up because they literally could not feed their people. So part of what's going to force change to go through, kind of like we were talking about before, that it can't all be a matter of individual choice. Sometimes the circumstances have to be thrust upon you. You're never going to choose to do those hard things until you're in the situation that you have to. But that competency crisis at some level, I think, is going to be the motivator of, oh, I've really got to figure this out, or, you know, we're not going to live through the winter, or whatever those real dire circumstances are, or we're going to run out of medicine, or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, look, there's a lot there, and thank you for that. One thing
wouldn't you say like one of the reasons why they wouldn't be able to do the whole like remove the women from the workforce is because they actually they hold most of the debt.
So I do think that is a big part of the equation of men are net resource producers and women are net resource consumers. And so this managerial regime, which decided to destroy culture in order to make people more uniform and more predictable and more interchangeable, both as workers and as consumers, that efficiency above all has reached a point where now that culture is defective or defunct, right? And in play of wanting the so-called consumer society. Now the thing is all wealth that has ever been created is a result of increasing efficiency of capital structure. The production must precede predation. You can't consume your way out of debt any more than you could stand in a bucket and lift the bucket up, right? Mm-hmm. So to focus on that productivity.
I mean, I can, but I hear
you. Right. So it's on the one hand, it's a system that is inherently flawed and doomed to collapse, just like communism. But on the other hand, I think people should not just assume this collapsatory mentality of, oh, eventually the system has to fail, because that could be 3 lifetimes from now, right? And I have greater hope for myself, for my children, and so on, that this needs to be fixed sooner than that. And I think things will get bad fast enough that we'll want them fixed sooner than that. So, I'd like to bring it back a little bit, not like back into time, but kind of scale back from the nuances that we're talking about, into, right, looking at, once again, well, no, actually, let's go to your point, right? There's a lot of, I don't want to even paraphrase. So there is a lot of facades, right? There's a lot of false pretenses that people end up buying into, right? Yeah,
right. I don't know who that was to.
And that's because of the cathedral, right? So academia and journalism. Academia manufactures public policy, and journalism manufactures public opinion, so that people buy into that public policy made in academia. That's the source of the rot. It's really academia and journalism is where these bad ideas are created.
Right.
So to me, it sounds like you're saying that free market is part of the problem, but it's also the solution. Is that sort of what you've been saying?
So I touched on this before you hopped on, but again, these things of like private versus public, or free market versus managed market, these are red herrings. They're not. So, for example, even now the system we have is very much socialist, and that James Burnham is really good on this. The managerial revolution. Capitalism in any real sense died in 1901 or somewhere around there. It started to really be killed off in earnest with Woodrow Wilson in the First World War, using war as an excuse for a command economy, and then FDR after him finished the job. And whether it was Stalinism or National Socialism in Germany or the New Deal in America, they're all just variants on a theme. And the whole, we have Federal Reserve notes that are really backed by sovereign bonds. The sovereign bond question is actually a big part of my book as well. And then that so-called the risk-free rate and everything that Wall Street and the stock market is built atop of. And there's no real market to any of that. Open market operations is a oxymoron. And there is a question now. I did see that Dwight asked, well, what about the national debt? I would not focus on the national debt so much as can the banks who are tasked with open market operations actually place that sovereign debt? There are signs now that they can't convince people to buy these treasuries. That's more going to be the tell, is if they cannot roll over that debt, that's what will bring it to a head. But everything else is built on that. It's a house built on sand. So the idea that you have a free market when the fundamentals of how the money and everything is coordinated is built on basically a communist ledger system. There's no real, other than informal networks or relative price signals, but yeah, you really don't know which way is up when it's all built on a fake foundation.
Right. So, I mean, this goes into a lot of things that we talk about, not just finances, but just in terms of people seeing and believing, right? I mean, look, believe half of what you see, none of what you hear, and people buy into whatever the fuck they think they see in the moment, right? Whether it was the news said this, or I saw it on TikTok, or whatever the case. And the manipulation factor, I think, is very high. The snake oil salesman, proverbially, he has gotten pretty good these days. Even the ones that fucking suck are doing very well, like in terms of garnering attention, following sales, depending on the niche.
Yeah, I wish I didn't have this thing called a conscience or something, or integrity, because I'll go for that snake oil money. But so here's the question though, now finances play such a huge role in the demise of relationships. A lot of divorces are based on finances, So with the economy the way that it's going and the struggles that the economy has, could we blame the lack of financial stability, or the fact that it takes two incomes these days to support a family, to really be a cause for a role for decline in marriages? Not so much that people are seeing divorce rates go up, but could it be financially? They're just like, I can't afford to be married, or I can't afford to get involved in something that potentially could risk losing the very little assets that I have.
Right, which is, so that again comes back to the great stagnation problem, right? That we're in this Brezhnev stagnation stasis where there's no real growth or real productivity. And hence we're in the midst of a competency crisis. So trying to do all those things that the men who have that drive to want to be productive and want to accomplish great things cannot find a real outlet to do that.
Yes.
That's why I think the solution is going to come from, there's a lot of guys raring to go in that way. And they're, weaponized autists who can solve very complex problems and achieve great things if they can get paid sustainably to focus on those things. And at the same time, they want that payment because they want to do all those things you just mentioned. They want to afford a home and date and get married and have kids and do normal things. So it's a question of figuring out that alternative capital raising mechanism that people can actually believe in and participate in, and that is actually going to be productive. That's where my focus has been on lately. One of the most successful recent examples of that was Michael Milken creating the junk bond market. It was the first time that banking was challenged in a real way, that there was an alternative way to raise money for businesses that did not depend on banking. And of course, banking is very tied in the government as well. Not that junk bonds aren't, because that had to be issued by the SEC. But eventually, he was thrown under the bus because nobody has totally clean hands in Wall Street, and he was working with Ivan Boesky, and maybe he knew that some of that was insider trading, and there's even a whole argument of whether insider trading really should be criminalized or not. But when he got pinched, of course, he threw Milken under the bus, and that kind of killed his revolutionary role in it. But then Wall Street was able to absorb the junk bond market regardless. We sort of see that now with crypto as well, Bitcoin ETFs. They find a way to kind of cordon it off and make it part of their system. They did this with the internet too. The internet in the 90s and early 2000s was supposed to be this super disruptive technology, and big media found a way to make the internet part of the old regime and maintain their base of power. So they're very good eventually slowly figuring out how to absorb these things that could be a threat to them. But that was one example. Crypto's another. But again, we've seen all these, because people are so desperate, we've seen all these scams and rug pulls, and people rightly also have a lot of skepticism around a lot of crypto projects as well. Likewise, SEC has regulation A+ and regulation CF for crowdfunding. People are experimenting with ways to do this, but we don't really know. I don't know anybody that's figured out the perfect solution to how to raise capital that will go to genuinely productive activities, that's hiring our guys, and we know we can trust our guys to actually be productive. It's very similar to in a great financial crisis in 2008, Abacus Bank, which was for the Chinatown community, were the only ones where they went to prison, and yet they're also the only ones that had no defaults. And they went to prison because when regulators came in and said, well, can you substantiate why you gave these people loans? They couldn't, but they had a high trust society, which is why they also didn't have any defaults. So you can see that the incentives are totally backwards from what a sane system would be. But that's the issue, is how do we have the abacus banks, the community banks? Again, Richard Werner is very big on this. He talks about that Germany is actually very good, that he has a term for it, but they have a lot of small family businesses that are the real powerhouses behind their economy, like a 1,000 times more, some very large number like that, than any other country. And it's a big part of why they manufacture almost as much as China, but do it with 7% of their labor force. Like it's incredible how efficient they can be from that. Something like that. Again, when I work out the details, and I'm a billionaire, I'll be sure to let you know. But something in that sphere is the way that it has to work. That's how we build the life raft.
So can I ask, is there a time in history or any particular culture that you think would be more aligned that we should be moving towards? Because obviously right now things are a bit fucked, but is there any time in history where you're like, things are quite good here and we should try and replicate some of those values and some of that time?
Yeah, so that's always the conundrum, right? Is you can't go home again, you can't go into the past. This idea of we just got to go back to the 1990s or we just got to go back to the 1950s is not a real prescription. But we can certainly learn from the past and look at where we've made mistakes along the way and maybe undo those mistakes and then figure out a way to move forward. My book gets into as well is basically publicly traded securities are kind of the big mistake. I know private equity has a deserved bad reputation in many respects as well, but something more like family-owned businesses. When we had the so-called robber barons of the Carnegies and the JP Morgans, and who's the other one I'm thinking of? Rockefeller, right, but it was Henry Ford. Henry Ford famously hated the financiers who he thought they were parasites on his ability to manufacture cars and pay good wages and cars that his workers could afford. That focus on capital structure, I think, is the right way to move forward. Japan in the period leading up to Imperial Japan also did very much the same thing. Their banking originated in the Zaibatsu, which are the predecessors of the Keiretsu, basically like a manufacturing concern. That, if they were Mitsubishi manufacturing engines and steel and airplanes and cars and drills and all that, light and heavy machinery, because they were productive and sold things for profit, people were willing to bank with them, and that became their own internal bank to then fund future development. Something like that, where the emphasis is first and foremost on that productive capex, and then the financials come afterwards. Whereas we put the cart before the horse with financialization, where there's an old saying that when ideas chase money, you're going to have prosperity, but when money chases ideas, you should expect disaster. And the flood of artificial cheap credit is why we have money chasing ideas. It's just looking for places to go because better to make something than nothing just sitting on it.
Well, now, wouldn't you say that like maybe cutting down some of these social services programs would be a step in the right direction? Don't they take like 1/3 of our, don't they make up about 1/3 of the budget besides the military? Like, aren't they the next biggest
Yeah, I mean, those are the big ones, for all the complaints of like China as a comparison of, they print so much credit and they've got a housing bubble and their businesses are, state controlled and so inefficient. We do the same thing. It's just that it's the military industrial complex and the entitlements program. But that credit creation flooding into regime aligned sectors phenomenon it's the same pattern.
Because like if we're putting up all these like illegals in housing, like in New York and all these places, like they're like literally
undocumented.
No, they're illegal immigrants. They're aliens. They're from out.
They're not aliens.
Country. No, they are.
They have
from this country.
What month are we in now? They have 10 months. They will get deported. I think.
On Cinco de Mayo, we're gonna deport them.
But like so because these businesses, like these like hotels or whatever they're using to house these people that are business owned, they're getting a credit, and this credit is there's
you're paying for it.
It just adds on to the debt.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So that's the zombie capital phenomenon, and that's why there has to be a parallel institution. Sometimes it's called pillarization. That you almost get kind of like a Gulch scenario, right? That if all of the productive people abandon that and voluntarily coordinate to participate in a different system where they know they're working with people who actually care about productivity and looking out for each other and create a high trust society separate from the low trust society, they will flourish, whereas that rest of that system is dysfunctional and they won't be able to figure it out. So that self-segregation is something that we're figuring out, but how to get, making the first million is the hardest, right? Getting the funding to prove that, yes, you can trust us with working for this company and moving maybe to another city, and we are going to be able to pay you for 2 years. So, moving your family across country, and where is your food going to come from? Those are real questions that deserve real answers, and people need to actually see that you can deliver on that. It can't just be empty promises. That's the part that I think we're figuring out now. And I don't know if you're getting any teal bucks or Elon bucks, but I'm not getting any of those. So this hope that they're going to be paying us. I haven't gotten that check yet.
I haven't said anything triggering enough yet.
So
I could help you. I could help you out, Glenn.
I think you should help me out. I think it'll be great.
I can do that.
We'll split it 50-50.
Could we say then that, just to build on Glenn's points, one of the things that a decent way forward would be to remove some of the government's safety nets for people?
Well, so
what do you mean from people? Which people?
What's that?
Well, I would say, even from citizens themselves, because when they feel essentially we are paying for it.
But like what I'm asking is who is the safety nets for?
For everyone, brother. Like even if you're talking about
the old middle class, what used to be called the middle class.
Security?
Yeah, all of that.
So I think Buckminster Fuller made a good point that you never succeed in anything by fighting the existing system. You succeed by making that system obsolete. So it can't be fixed. It's irredeemable. What can be done is creating an alternative that only attracts the right people. So instead of diversity, inclusion, and equity, we do the opposite of exclusion,
segregation, and none of your businesses.
Yeah, and the people who are actually productive are going to be attracted to that, and the people who are not are going to stick with their handout system, and that self-sorting mechanism will likely solve the problem. So as far as like our money, yeah, well, if we have a parallel credit system, and maybe it is some kind of crypto or something yet to be created, but that then becomes more valuable than, the dollar hegemony that everybody else is depending on.
So would it be fair to say, Sean, that you you've researched throughout your life and currently do many of these topics to give people truth from your perspective so that they can make better decisions? And again, I didn't even know you had books out.
I hope so. I mean, my day job is I own an independent wealth management firm, and we specialize in business exit planning. So generally it's what's called the sell side of mid-market. Mid-market is anything between a business valuation of as little as $2 million up to maybe $200 million. Right. We can wrap it up so that when they do sell, they're not going to have to pay taxes on that sale. So instead of writing a check, for 40% of that to Uncle Sam that then goes off to Ukraine, they get to keep it themselves, and they can reinvest it in their.
Yeah. And you can do a similar thing with real estate. I realize it's not that exactly, but essentially
similar to a 1031. And actually, if somebody's in a position of considering a 1031, this other deferred sales trust structure has some advantages that are worth making at least that comparison. This is not financial advice. Talk to your wealth manager, or set up.
Which should be Sean.
Well,
should be Sean.
I have to be careful about I can't take testimonials, but there are solutions out there, and so again that's more my focus, and that's also where I'm coming from, knowing that this publicly traded securities market is not long for this world. The demographic crisis of boomers retiring, as well as some other compounding factors like the rise of indexing, or so-called passive investing, and there's no such thing as passive, it's just algorithmic trading, is going to create some kind of liquidity crisis or liquidity cascade that's going to be an issue. So working with private equity and private family-owned businesses, sort of like Cargill for agriculture, is likely to be the future, and the place where there's going to be some real growth. So the same way we're dealing with this great stagnation, the zombie capital problem is probably not going away anytime soon. It's likely to get worse because they need to freeze those prices in place. So if somebody is someone that has $20 million in an IRA, and they don't want it to get gated because there is a crisis, like with mortgage-backed securities, where the government says, okay, we can't sustain this S&P 500 index anymore, so we're going to keep those prices artificially high, but we're also going to prevent you from taking out more than 10% per year. So they're giving up liquidity for artificially high prices as like a way to maintain stability. I mean, that's exactly what Maiden Lane basically did for mortgage-backed securities as a special purpose vehicle. They've now lost that benefit of liquidity of investing in whatever they want to invest in. So before a scenario like that plays out, those kinds of people can look at, well, maybe there's other, private market deals where there is an opportunity for real growth. And again, it'd be great to get that funding in for our kind of guys as well.
So I know, Uncle Fatty's statement. You guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bring it back up.
Do you want to address this? Can you always say it's a Nazi?
I want to address it, but you go first, Sean, if you want to address it.
So where do I want to? I think
where do you begin?
I think it's another one of these red herring things. I'm not saying that it was great that Ford had a copy of the Austrian painter's portrait on his desk, and apparently vice versa. And anybody can go read from his publication from Dearborn, Michigan, right? But there is some nuance in, did he have some legitimate grievances with a East Coast banking financial system that was dictating terms to him, not in the best interest of efficient capital, but that they were using financialization to game the system? Regardless of, I think the JQ is a red herring issue as well. It just derails conversations. But focusing on, is there a power elite that was manipulating money just to gain an advantage over other people while not being productive? I think that was a real grievance and something actually worth elaborating on.
Yeah. So I want to answer this and kind of to Sean, but from a very different angle. So I'm somewhat financial and business savvy, right? I've had a couple businesses that I suppose would have met your threshold, barely, fucking barely. But nonetheless, I've done okay. And I definitely get the overall concepts of what you're talking about. Some of the nuances I'm just not very familiar with. But here's what I will say, and it's to kind of answer this and just as not a rebuttal, but a different angle. A lot of what you're talking about in terms of, well, if we do this and then we do that, is based upon people, and I'm not saying all people, and I'm not even saying all people involved in it, but people doing the right thing. right? If they're moving ethically, right, in a sense, just to make it binary. So my thought is, and this is just bringing it back, working on improving people will therefore lead to better decisions when it comes to kind of what I would call the nuances in terms of getting in depth with some of this. And again, I realize this is high level. Most people probably don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I would think most people don't know how to fucking tie their shoes, so I can't think they would have any idea what you're talking about. Right. But they're not watching us, so don't worry about that.
If I could just interject real quick, that is a point too, because you mentioned, how our opinions are made for us. And that is the problem with democracy and egalitarianism is when your vote supposedly matters or your opinion matters, there is now a very strong concerted effort to make sure that you have the right quote unquote opinions, that suddenly a lot of investment in making sure that you think a certain way, which is why the propaganda is so heavy. If you could just mind your business, like I don't need to be on the decision-making team for how Apple makes their next MacBook Pro. Right. If they make a new one and I like it, I'll buy it. And if I don't like it, I won't buy it. That's as much as I need to be involved in that decision-making process.
Right. Yeah.
The same thing with, I don't need to have my 2 cents in on all, the idea of public policy or arguing over. I mean, we talk about these things of what's wrong with society, but it doesn't need to be such a wide scope and apply to everybody. It's more my group of friends, the people who I trust, the group that I'm going to create a high trust society with, we can discuss these things and figure it out. But the idea that everybody that we all have to take a vote on what we're going to have for dinner today is a big part of the problem, because people are not equipped to make those decisions. And so you're always going to have, like the Italian school of elite theory, you're always going to have the people who decide, well, when you take a vote and what the topics are going to be, they become the power that then do the agenda setting of how votes are conducted. Or like that Stalin quote of, it's not the votes that count, but who counts the votes. That's what inevitably happens. The iron law of oligarchy. Oligarchy is inevitable. There will never be a system that is not oligarchical. It may pretend to be, and it's a ruse to get you to go along with it. So once you accept that, do you want an oligarchy that is effective and productive and takes care of its people? Or do you want an oligarchy that only looks out for itself and its self-interest? And the egalitarianism experiment is the latter. And we've had...
The egalitarian experiment has failed us so far, right. And it's been a failing model since its implementation.
Because the people are stupid. When you have leaky power, when you give too many people the decision-making capacity, no good decisions get made. You need a core group of competent... I trust Elon Musk to make Starlink and get satellites up and rockets that actually work. I don't, other than buying the service, I don't need to be involved in that.
Right.
See, this whole the painter guy, you know what I'm talking about? The guy with the funny little mustache.
Yep.
Right. Like they bring that up as like if it's they get it, he's a bad guy. But just because he was a bad guy, just because you don't like the bad guy, but you actually increase the debt and you extend the welfare system, putting it on the backs of the working class.
Well, so here's the thing, right?
That's more of an assault on people's livelihood than what the Austrian painter did in the long run. Like, how many people's lives have been negatively affected because they have to pay for the lives of those that don't want to be successful or put in the work, who are lazy, who, have 27 kids and live on welfare, make welfare a career rather than a short, term assistance. Like, we got people rolling around in Hummers on welfare.
These comparisons are necessarily fraught, but America had National Socialism too, and it was called the New Deal. Instead of the swastika, we had the Blue Eagle, which the National Recovery Administration made as it like they tried doing the same thing. Goebbels came over when they were building the Hoover Dam and said, yes, this is the way things are going to be done going forward. In fact, there's a great book, the H-Man's American Model of when they passed the Nuremberg race laws. They copy pasted Jim Crow and Yellow Peril laws from the United States. I'm like, here's how you do it. If you need a legal way to do racial discrimination, America's got it figured out. Or you're trying to figure out a legal way to do eugenics, America's already done that. And neither side really wants to admit that that's where the source came from. But that's the reality, is they looked at how America had done it, and they admired FDR and how the Democrats were doing it at that time, and just tried to copy it. And even as a kid, he really enjoyed reading the Westerns of Karl May. And Karl May was basically describing Indian removal, except that Operation Ost was just, instead of getting rid of Indians, they're getting rid of Slavs. But the same idea of Lebensraum, James Polk was doing, or Andrew Jackson was doing exactly the same thing. It's just a matter of when that occurred and who won, right? If you win the war, you get to write the history books, and if you lose it, your enemies write the history books.
Yeah, no, entitlement should not be forever. That's stupid. Entitlement should not be for unless you're disabled or there's your family has to take care of you because of an illness. But like other than that.
And also when FDR passed the New Deal, those entitlements were pretty explicitly for white people. And not to get, I'm not trying to sound like a social justice.
So you're saying my black ass can't get any? That's fucked up.
And that would the system have been designed the same with that, culture and circumstance in mind? The people the voters they were trying to win over with entitlements were much more, white middle class people who wanted to own a home and get a 30-year mortgage. And that's the problem with patronage as well, right? Is when you're just buying votes, you're stuck on that cycle of who can make the biggest promises, right? Everybody gets a pony.
Who has the best snake oil?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the best facade, smoke and mirrors.
If we keep the entitlements the way that we do, aren't we just incentivizing people to make dumb decisions? Like,
that's
hey,
what we
girls,
do.
Yeah,
that's what we do.
Don't worry about getting pregnant and having a bunch of kids and no dad around. Yeah. Don't worry. You know what? Your new daddy, the government, is going to take care of you and fund your life.
Exactly.
So that's the managerial revolution. After the Civil War, you had the progressive era, and they looked at the robber barons and said, well, these guys are acting like kings, and this is America where we have democracy. What needs to happen is us academics who are enlightened and familiar with the scientific process can scientifically manage society for the benefit of everybody. It's basically this like proto-communism. Whether it's called new nationalism, it went through a few different variations. And we basically got the soft version of that, where instead of nationalization, we have publicly traded stock. Again, in the early 20th century, every developed nation went through a managerial revolution. And it's that same short-term thinking, appeals to popularity, that gives people power, as opposed to having to make investments that may run a deficit. When Amazon started, they were negative for like a decade, and now they run everything. Right now, they're $1 billion company. But there was a long streak where the stock owners were like, "Why am I investing in this company? You haven't turned a profit in years and years and years. Are you ever going to be profitable?"
But that was on paper, though. To be fair, I mean, and I don't know all the nuances. But my understanding is they're reinvesting what they would have been profiting if they stopped the acceleration or scaled it back. They would have been very profitable. But no, I totally get what you mean. As far as the stockholders are concerned, and they're concerned about their pockets and their pockets today, even if it is a long-term investment, they don't want to see it down.
So this is a problem with indexing too, is basically there's no consideration for whether the companies themselves are actually valuable or not. Basically,
right,
because they're on the index is the reason why they get bought, and becomes this like self-fulfilling prophecy. Sure. And in addition to that, where is I going with that?
Well, you're talking about real value in terms of.
So there's any profit structure then evaporates. So this is how the publicly traded stock funded the managerial revolution. Is ownership got diluted, the C-suite takes over all the decision making, and because you have this central banking system that provides easy credit and makes sure that share price just keeps going up, they didn't have to have profitability and pay dividends in order to prove that they were profitable and sustainable. Suddenly that market rigor went completely out the window. They were then able to reinvest those dividends in the company, and there's all kinds of rationalizations of, well, that's the same thing, right? If you have an $8 share of stock and a $2 dividend, or a $10 share of stock, same thing. But it's not. And when you reinvest in a company, so one is the liquidity mechanism is totally different. Right. And the other is all they're really doing is hiring their buddies to shore up their position within the company, because they may claim they care about the company, but they care, at the very least, they care about themselves more, and they're going to hire on other administrators who are then going to defend them on the board or their decisions within the company in order to maximize that opportunity. So it's the principal agent problem. They're going to look out for their own survival within the company more than the company itself. And then on the bottom end of the totem pole, you see the same thing, but in reverse. We were talking about, people don't give a shit. Why should I work harder? I'm not going to get promoted. I'm not going to get a bonus.
Exactly.
I'm going to do the minimum to make sure I don't get fired.
Right.
They don't care about the company either, right? Nobody involved in this business actually cares about whether the company is doing anything useful or not. The people at the top are just trying to guard their jobs, and so are the people at the bottom, but they just do it
very different. Right? Yeah, it almost looks opposite in a sense, like you're saying. It's almost an inverse property.
And it's because that ownership has been diluted. They're all just temporary workers, temporary managers. Nobody is. It's not like a family business where the construction company in Japan that's been a family business for 300 years is saying, "Oh, I've really got to carry on this family legacy and make sure that we adapt for the whatever is going on." Because they care about the posterity of then giving it to their kids. They're thinking in terms of decades and centuries, whereas, the managerial system is looking only at fiscal quarters.
But, it's still not right or wrong. Like in terms of, as you're stating, they're looking at almost, passing it down to my, offspring in terms of value, but not real value, not about, necessarily integrity or what we would call values, good human values. It's about the paper value, the NASDAQ value. So this is where I'm coming from, is I understand what I can about the nuance, but when we bring it back, I think the real problem is the hearts or it's the lack of ethics, the lack of code. And what I frame it as is weak men, meaning that strong men will be good men and good men will do the right thing, regardless of the nuance. And it seems that more than anything right now, we have a population of weak men. Now going a different angle, just to make kind of a comparison, but left field. So when we look at like the dating coaches out there, I look at it as you're trying to give weak men a cheat code. And that's fucking bullshit. Not like I'm jealous bullshit, but like, what are you actually propagating? More degeneracy in terms of defending yourself from babies and this type of thing, STDs, bad stuff, The same problems that they're then complaining about.
Yeah.
Oh, why are women like this? I don't know. You keep perpetuating it, and then you wonder why.
Yeah, it's that biological Leninism phenomenon. Also, so I think the two things are happening at once. There are the people who are flat out lazy and are just trying to get by, but because the system is so discouraging, Yuri Bezmenov has his whole thing on ideological subversion and demoralization. There's also just a lot of men who are good men and would be productive, but they're thoroughly demoralized because they're not in a system that's going to recognize that, Their loyalty will be punished. Their productivity will be taken advantage of. And if you are a half-decent, smart guy, you're going to be like, why would I do that? Why would I put myself in the thresher, and self-sacrifice myself for nothing? But they do want to do it for a cause and a purpose that would be recognized and would be rewarded. And I think that is... We just got to get that based fund going and funded so that those people can be put into productive roles. If we can close that gap, I think that will be the alternative system that becomes the life raft. That the Titanic has hit the iceberg, it's sinking, but we've got to jump to whatever the next thing is that overcomes this competency crisis. And we have competent men. They're just disorganized, and the organized minority will always defeat the disorganized majority. We've got to have our own organized minority that can actually put those solutions in place, give people those jobs, have them doing productive things, and from that profit, create a sustainable system.
I almost see it as there's too much pragmatism. And I understand, pragmatism is very useful, right? But meanwhile, there's not enough of doing the right thing for the right reasons, regardless of the pragmatism, or at least what appears to be, Because we can't predict everything in our day-to-day lives on the micro level, but it seems that people are so distraught, they're discouraged from doing the right thing, which I don't take accountability off of them or myself or anyone else for, falling into that. But that's part of why I'm doing this. That's part of why I'm here, is to at least encourage the right thing at the kind of small but growing scale that I've been doing it.
Yeah, that's exactly why I try to be solutions focused as well. It's one thing to complain about the managerial elite or central banking or whatever, but what are you doing to actually help, that guy who's been ripped off by 5 different firms,
right,
who taken advantage of them, and promises were made that weren't kept, and you're going to be the 6th guy to be like, oh, but this time, trust me, bro, I'm actually going to take care of you. Like, you better really prove it.
Right. First time, shame on me. Or no, first shame on you, second shame on me, and therefore after, right? Yeah. You don't want to keep subjecting yourself to being slapped in the face, and every time that's what's going to happen. And you keep doing it, right? Until you get to the point of being disgruntled, right? As you're saying, there are good men out there where it almost seems like a double-edged sword, where no matter what you do, you're fucked, right? In this scenario you're claiming, you either go along with the program and you're fucked, or you don't go along with it and you're also fucked.
Right.
All right, catch 22.
Which is why I think we need to think of ourselves as being in the Soviet Union. This idea that, we're a free market, if only for, X, Y, and Z or whatever, that is long gone. If you need to think of yourself, if you were working in that toothbrush factory in, Irkutsk in 1974, what would you be doing to get out of that situation?
Right. And I think that we've discussed this, the 3 of us at least, Leroy, Glenn, and I, about kind of the tribalisms, the factions. And I think that men need more support, but not in the gay way, but like support in terms of groups of men they can go to, be a part of, where we have the same ethical, moral purviews. And maybe the nuances don't always look the same, but if it's coming from the same place, right, to do the right thing, you care about men, therefore women, therefore children, then I think in general you're going to make the right decisions.
My theory for this is I think it has to be the martial arts schools. I know within Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, this is often, you're proving that you commit to something, that you get better. You can't bullshit it. It's an honest signal because it requires real investment. And then when they say, hey, I'm starting a business, I'd like to hire you on. It's going to be risky, but are you willing to take that risk for me? If that's somebody that you've been sparring with and practicing with for 3 years, and you see that like they take these things seriously, and when they commit, they really commit, that's going to have more social capital or weight to it. And it's a place where you're getting men, they're doing physical activity in a non-gay way. And it's also useful as well, right?
I'm rubbing off on Sean. Very good.
Not like that. But there's a historic basis for this as well. I did Aikido for years, and Aikido in the West kind of has this reputation of it's the art of peace or something, and that's a good sales pitch. And it's truth, you do want to. It's better to disarm the situation. But the founder was hosting Black Ocean Society meetings in his dojo too. Like there's a right-wing militarist backing to the heritage of that martial art as well.
Aikido. This was at Aikido.
Yep.
It's funny. I had a friend. He was an Aikido teacher for years, and I did karate. Did either of you, Glenn or Leroy, do you do any martial arts, boxing, anything like that growing up?
Yeah, I did
a bit of MMA,
and I did some. I taught hand-to-hand combat when I was in the service. So.
Yeah, right. But yeah, I enjoyed that. I did karate for about 5-6 years, Japanese, Okinawan, based in, and then when I was like 15, I moved into boxing, and I had I think it was one amateur fight, although I did used to spar with, right? I used to spar with. I was New York State champion, pro champion at the time, middleweight champion. But with that said, I was a fucking kid. I mean, I was 16 sparring with him kind of on the regular, and he was really good. I mean, he was naturally good. But it's funny, kind of like we were talking about in the beginning here, and I don't want to name his name because this is kind of negative, but I'm just saying what is. He was very talented. However, he was incredibly lazy. Every day, I mean, I would go there after school, there an hour or two, as I could. But like every day, he'd be, talking with the girls, and he'd just kind of messing around and just hop in the ring, right? He was very good, talented, and I'm sure he could have been great. But there was that kind of, it seemed like, and this is only a couple years I was around him, but just lack of work ethic when it came down to it. He was
Yeah.
relying on talent rather than effort.
Yeah. Again, Dune's kind of having a moment because the movies are out, but Frank Herbert mentioned this quite a bit in his novels. People need adversity. If things are too easy, they degenerate, right? Your muscles get weak. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah, very true.
You need an environment that pushes you in order to actually unlock that potential. And,
Right.
Maybe martial arts is one place to do it, but, or at least, can be kind of the seed that then creates the pearl and the oyster, but it's got to start somewhere. And martial arts schools were one place that I thought, okay, that's something that's pretty common, already established. It's good exercise. It's good for, team build. Like it has all the basic elements. That build something around that. Yep.
Right. And, so, I particularly, I'll let you go right after this, Libra. I particularly like sparring. Sparring to me was, and I mean, this was full contact. I mean, essentially none to the face, but that was a lie. like don't hit in the face, but yeah, that was a lie.
And same with, approach anxiety, call reluctance,
Sure.
public speaking. You need, I mean, man, so many people, I'm like, oh, this is somebody who's never been punched in the face. Like they would never be as arrogant if they'd actually had that experience.
No, you're totally correct.
More kids need to be punched in the face.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what I'm seeing is the overarching theme here is that there's too many options. And with so many options, then whenever something gets hard, when something gets difficult, people can just leave and
they bail. Yeah, it's the prisoner's dilemma.
Then they're avoiding all of the potential hardship that they could be dealing with.
Yeah,
even when we talk about careers and stuff like that, men used to have jobs for life, like one job, one career, and even if they didn't like it, then they grew to love it over time and they became invested in it. Whereas now, as soon as they deal with any trials, tribulations, anything like that, they're just like, find the next job, the next easy path, and move forward with that.
Yeah,
fight or flight.
Right. In the prisoner's dilemma, whether to stay loyal and risk the higher punishment or bail and turn in your cohort for a lighter sentence, we've totally subsidized the bail option. It's always easy to bail. Quit your job after 2 years, get easy divorce from your spouse. It's always easier to bail because freedom of choice and individual consent is this paramount good of, you should be able to change whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. The lack of enforced duty and accountability and responsibility is you need that. And for those reasons, if you might not like it up front, but when you have to stick with it and see it through, I mean, if you're in the military and you don't like doing push-ups in the mud, it's not like a month into it, you're like, I don't want to do this anymore, send me home. No,
that would happen. They ended up on the Unalive watch. Glenn know what I'm talking about. But no, I mean, you're totally right? You make this commitment, and even from the time of boot camp, just like you're saying, if you think that you decide, well, I'm going to leave now, it's too tough, I don't like it, I miss my girlfriend, whatever bullshit, you will realize very quickly that you would have been better off not saying that, because now you fucked. Now you fucked. And part of the reason you fucked is that your mindset has changed to escape, to flight. Right. And meanwhile, you cannot physically. And if you do physically, you will be brought back in, right? They'll send the marshals after you. I mean, whatever. So, you're right. Commitment.
And we sort of, we seem to understand this when it's things like, that people would do things when they're drunk that they wouldn't do sober. But we don't think about it in terms of all the other things that affect your decision-making process, right? And maybe we have to, take those cultural structures, again, more seriously, that Chesterton's fence of those things existed for a reason, and getting rid of them is changing people's behavior.
Right. And, even before behavior, bringing it back, their ethics, their morals, right? They're lacking, right? There's a butterfly effect to that, right? I touch on this a bit, but I don't have time to cook. I got to go to McDonald's or whatever, right? I don't have money to eat. Well, I have to go to Wendy's or whatever. And they're inevitably these excuses that logically aren't true. I mean, I could disprove them. People could disprove them themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a coping mechanism, really, right? Like, I mean, the idea that I had no choice, I had to do this. It's not my responsibility. I had no choice. That's a cope because it's not true.
Part of it is rationalization. Part of it is, not to blame society, but if it is a dysfunctional society that makes it very difficult to get to the grocery store, to buy your ingredients, to learn how to cook and invest the time in that, versus, I can just pop into a McDonald's, it's every 3 blocks. The system's also working against you a bit too. So it's a combination of both. And we're going to need, forming a friend group or forming a high trust, group to, hey, don't do that thing. I know it's easy to slip up. Like if somebody is an alcoholic and you're their sponsor or whatever, of, hey, I got you. Just give me a call. We'll do something else, and we'll make sure you don't slip up. Having those, like you're saying, have those kind of accountability groups, like a gym buddy, is going to help a lot.
No, I agree, right? We were talking about men shaming other men, right, to a degree, because shame can mean different things to different people, levels. But essentially, I mean, as you're speaking, right, what the fuck? Why didn't you do this? You said you were going to do it. Why didn't you do it? Right? I thought you were going to be a man of your word, not a male of not your word.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that we have to be hostile and sinister. If you're coming from a place of good, right, you mean it with good intentions, even when it's really hard, right? I mean, I spent enough time in the Marine Corps, and the lessons there are very harsh. I mean, at least they were. And this is going back. This was, I don't know, I guess 16 years ago. So this was back a little bit before the women were in the infantry and all this other, PC shit has come out. And I also recognize, I'm sure it wasn't nearly as brutal as around Vietnam or World War II. And I don't just mean during the conflict. I just mean those periods.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we look at, like, say, the job situation, and then we compare it to, say, the military situation. So in the military, you have to sign a contract for so many years of service.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that would be a good idea in everyday jobs? Because then if you want to leave, then you're going to face some fucking consequences for it. And that would be hardship at your doorstep.
So again, as well as also trying to solve this capital raise problem, maybe there'd be something of, you're going to make like a venture capital investment in the firm. And if you bail early, you don't get all the money back. You get 30% back.
Right.
So, you can, if life circumstances change, somebody in your family suddenly becomes deathly ill, or, I get that nobody's going to predict the future perfectly, but you're going to weigh those consequences of, okay, is this enough of an issue that I'm going to have to bail, and make the cost of bailing higher? Again, in that prisoner's dilemma, we've made bailing way too easy, and we just have to balance it out. It doesn't mean that you can't, but just it has to be closer to 50-50. I also got to hit the head quick, so I'm going to head out.
Yeah. This has been a good conversation.
Yeah, it's a little different to what we normally do, where we roast people and make fun of them, and then make memes out of them. Like we're actually acting like adults right now. What the hell is wrong with them?
It's the least clippable too.
Like this is like there's not one triggering thing here.
Where's your glass of wine? You gotta have the wine glass.
Like, man,
real life adults. Look at that.
We're acting like grown folk. Like we actually act like we're mature or something. The fuck is this? Can we go back to our normal shit? Can we find somebody to roast?
Let's call someone gay.
So yeah. I think tomorrow night going to be a good night for that. In particular.
Oh, did you? Are you roasting or non-roasting today because of Easter?
Yeah, I'm being.
Yeah, that's what it is.
It's. It was an accident.
Leroy, what time is it over there?
It is 7:01 p.m.
On what day?
Easter Sunday.
Oh, okay.
31st.
Oh, you on the West Coast? You're both on.
You're over here. Where are you at on the West Coast?
Vancouver, man. Socialist Canada.
Oh man, you know what? When I used to live up in Washington, I used to go to Victoria all the time. Yeah, I feel bad for you.
Yeah, do feel sorry for me, bro. I fucking hate it here.
All right, we just smuggle you in.
But
Yeah,
we'll do the Diddy way. I mean,
no, it's too soon. But Glenn, you're in CA, right? You're in California.
Yeah, I'm CA.
Yeah, I mean, look,
I'm in LA.
Yeah, but you can't. I mean, look. I mean, you're in the same state as me. It's just the opposite. New York, California, fucking dumpster fires.
It's the same here, man.
Wait a minute, you in LA too?
No, I'm in New York. But I did live in LA.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's going quite a bit downhill, don't you think?
Yeah, but we need our allies with us.
Sean,
well, we can't have Leroy be the only black guy up there in Vancouver. Come on now.
I'm 4%. I told you about this. Hold up.
I know. And then with my 5%, with my 5%, we make 10 or 9, and then his 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
You got to add them. That's how it works.
I'm a half caste man.
So Sean, we were just talking about how fucking mature we are tonight compared to normal.
Yeah, like Sean, you're bringing the adult out of us.
Glad to hear it. Maybe we'll get something done.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
So what are the shows you've been on? I was really curious. I know Leroy said he saw you on some. I thought I saw you. It's hard to remember, but I thought I saw you on Torsh's show a while back. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, I've been on Tori's show a bit. Okay. Also, Jay Burden is fantastic. Dimes, who does Blood Satellite. Who else? I'm sure there's others. Prudentialist, I talk with quite a bit. So that whole dissident right, sort of like, Aaron McIntyre is on Blaze now. That whole, I don't know, that whole scene.
So you don't have a YouTube channel, right? Like you just pop on as you?
Not of my own, yeah. Okay. Between running a business, looking after my folks, and trying to write this book, I need to figure out how to get more hours in the day. That's what I'll never understand, people who say that they're bored or lack purpose. I'm like, I don't know how to help you. I've got too much to do. I'm happy to tell other people what to do.
And, I think that is a big thing. That's something I want to mention earlier is the whole purpose factor. And of course, right, how do you define purpose? Mm-hmm. But just generally, I think that was the nail on the head when you said that men lacking purpose is fucking disastrous. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's bad. It's teenage pregnancy. It's, catheter. It fucking sucks. It's not good. Mm-hmm. And so the more that we see men getting on their purpose, right? Not my purpose, not your purpose, but their own purpose. I think that the better society becomes. It just does by virtue. Even if it's indirectly, even if it's not a direct mechanism to the society.
I mean, that's a big part of being alive, not to get too philosophical about it, but finding what you're made of and finding out like who you are, what you actually like and what you don't like. You have to actually go out and do stuff to figure that and put yourself in dangerous and situations you haven't been in before. And on the one hand, it's a real lack of opportunities to do that. And at the same time, again, it's one of those, society anesthetizes people and tell, don't risk that. So people are getting it both ways. Of they lack the carrot and the stick. So they just
fucked.
So in turn then, Sean, how did you find your purpose?
So this is, I could not be one of these coaches of figuring, or, and both of them are bullshit artists too, but I've always felt this way. I mean, same way, like, how did I know I'm straight? I've never, it's never come up of like, oh, I wonder how I feel. So I don't know how to communicate to other guys who, if they don't have that sense of purpose or when they don't have motivation. I mean, the really base one is how am I going to make enough money to afford rent? And how am I going to go solve problems for people that I can live the kind of life that I want? I don't know where I don't know where all this money comes from, in the sense of where are all these simps getting money for OnlyFans to throw at these e-thoughts? Like, can I have some of that? I'll generate an AI.
They still live at home with their parents, so like, you know.
Is that what it is? I mean, I'd love to see the real data on this. I'm sure that's
what is it, like what do they call them? Like they're living in those next gen homes.
The NEETs, right? Not engaged in employment.
Well, I think I might know what the disconnect is here, Sean. So strong is not the same as powerful, right? At least per my purview, how I would define them, I think, you know, kind of neutrally, that there's powerful men who are not strong men. And what I mean by that is you can have the leverage of money without having actually built yourself and being on your purpose.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of where the disconnect is of how are they doing it. And I'm not saying that, you know, what you're describing as simps on OnlyFans. I'm not saying that they're all CEOs or anything like that. I'm just saying that there's too much of looking at strength in terms of physical size or following size, clout, right? This invisible thing that doesn't really exist, but it kind of does. And then the resource, which can be real or not, it can be inflated, but in terms of essentially what is your, you know, like, what do you own? Your wealth, right? How much time do you have? And I know people don't think this way, but I do. Your living expenses, your cost of living versus what you have accumulated, right? Do you have a year of wealth and you're a billionaire? I mean, that would be terrible, but, or do you have 10 years of wealth and you make hardly anything, but you live a very, right, low technological, you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so because we have this like stasis, right? If we compared it to like a communist government, I became a party member and that took care of all the basics and I knew I'm going to get this sinecure where I don't really do anything. Yeah, people might have a lot of financial reward from that, but they never actually had to do anything useful or productive to get it. And that's why you see, you know, it's like book learning, right? There's all these tech bros that, okay, they were in some startup that had a successful exit and now they're multimillionaires, but they're afraid to talk to girls and they don't know how to interact. They're not socially calibrated to interact like human beings. Right. And so then they're going to pay all the exorbitant money to some coach who is faking it as well to teach them basic social skills.
No, that's about it. What you said is about it. The other side of that is I'm not going to pay the coach and, you know, but instead I will do exactly what you're saying, spending money on OnlyFans or whatever other mechanisms there are. I don't know exactly, but signing up for whatever the sites are, or, you know, basically doing that. Or Sugar Daddy, right? Like the whatever the site Myron uses. What the fuck is that site?
Like Seeking Arrangement or something.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Right, so there's different mechanisms to do it from each angle, kind of. And this is something that Leroy and I were talking about, I think, last night, is that when we look at the coaches, the red pill, you know, so-called leaders, that they and the women, the so-called thoughts, are both eating off the same plate, meaning that they're looking for weak men, their competition, literally. You know, whether it's the red pill thought leader saying, oh, don't go to them, they're going to steal your money. And then meanwhile, those women I have to think are saying the same thing, like, oh, red pill is gross. And they're both right. I mean, they are both right in that context. You should not be spending money on the other one. Where they go wrong is that you should be spending money on me. Because like you said, it's usually fake. And in case of the OnlyFans or whatever, it's so fake that it's actually dudes typing to you on the other end.
Yeah. And there's this element of easy come, easy go as well. There's this illusion that we're somehow magically in a post-scarcity society. It's a mass hysteria or mass psychological phenomenon that people do not think of the money that they make in terms of, you know, oh, I better afford a place to live, and am I going to buy a home, and you know, am I going to make sure that I always have enough food to eat? Like they think that these basic things are met, and then on the other side, they are absolutely desperate for emotional well-being and a sense of belonging. You know, I often compare it to Maslow's hierarchy of needs as well. That those bottom two ones, they think are taken care of, or mommy and daddy will pay for it, or I'll go on welfare, but something, they never think I'm going to be homeless, right? There will be something that protects
a safety net. Yeah, absolutely.
But then if you don't have those challenges, if you don't crawl before you walk, then those next ones of belonging and emotional well-being, yeah, of course you're not developing those because you never had the trial by fire to those kinds of exercises to get there. So then they fall down on that. And yeah, either they're lucky enough that they were in the right place at the right time, that they do have all this money and no idea what to do with it. And they think that everything is, women do this too, where they think of everything as experiences. On Tori's show, I've brought this up of like, do you really believe that we live in a world of scarcity? Because they might even say we do, but they are not worried about like, how am I going to afford rent, or how am I going to, fix my car, or things that, 20 years ago were kind of like most of your thoughts were tied up in like, do I have the kind of job that I can afford these things? And if I don't, how am I going to train for the next one? And it was much more about how can I deal with these physiological and material things. Now everything is just so cheap or so taken care of that it's more the lack of emotional, social development that everybody is obsessed with. And because of that, they're not doing those productive things.
Yeah, so I don't want to get too philosophical. Maybe I do. Maybe I'm a liar. But at the end of the day, look, I mean, what you're saying I do agree with very much. And on the other side of that is, if you were to die today, right, or tomorrow, what have you, what would the, not just the feeling of the experience, but what did you offer in terms of good and bad? And right, striving for that purpose, I think, is innately good, unless psychopath think his purpose is to do something very bad. Obviously, that's not a good purpose, but I'm just speaking from the, I guess, spiritual sense, right, the faith-bearing sense, that if you are truly on your purpose to do the right thing for the right reasons, that even if all hell breaks loose tomorrow, today, I can deal with it because I know that I'm doing my best, which is very different than the pragmatism of, well, what's this going to look like? Am I going to have a home? Am I going to, right? So we're not willing to sacrifice. There's too much fear of, well, what if I lose material things? I need a house to survive. Maybe you fucking don't. Maybe nobody had houses 1,000 years ago, right? I mean,
that's valid too. What that also makes me think of is, I've definitely been with some wanton women where most people are not comfortable being alone with their thoughts. A big part of why they're doing things like,
hey, I have no problem being alone with thoughts.
Right.
He didn't mean that thought.
Oh.
But the intrusive thoughts.
They're intrusive.
No, they are intrusive.
But, they're going to seek out, sleeping around or doing drugs or playing video games, anything that is a distraction from actually having to confront themselves and what they're doing.
That's a great point, man. That makes me back to like Isaac Newton and both Einstein to come up with some of their greater thoughts. They spent loads of time alone with no one around them. And that's how they made, some of the biggest steps forward for mankind. It's just by spending time deep in their own thoughts. And that is not possible. Well, it is possible today, but no one is willing to deal with that uncomfortable feeling. And no one is comfortable enough to remain in their own thoughts because, well, they go
so easy
wild.
To pull out your phone and doom scroll and watch 5-second TikToks. Yep.
So is there any way that we could incentivize that for people that you could think of?
So, I mean, I other than coming back to, I mean, this is maybe a little bit of a catch-22, but if you do have friends who care about you, maybe you can have some kind of accountability system that you're trying to help each other get to a better place. If you're alone and have no friends, and I mean, that could be tough. I wish I had the solutions to help everybody.
So I do want to answer this though. I know it was directed towards you, but here's the thing. Right, anecdotal, but that's why we're here in part. Is so I actually did this myself, right? And I don't think anything's binary, but A few years back, I would say I don't know, at the time, I probably would say I had 50 friends, something like that.
Mhm.
Right? I have a house party, 50 people over, about
Yeah, yeah.
that. All right. So with that, I did actually cut about all of them but two out of my life over a couple years.
Mhm. Yep.
And it was a very difficult thing to do, right? I deleted all my social media, right? Facebook,
Mhm.
Instagram, all these bullshit things. And this is something that definitely Leroy and I talked about. I don't know if Glenn was there during this one, but is I had somebody on stream recently, a couple weeks ago, Beaten Cheeks, and he was talking about he's telling men to get out more and talk to women. And I
Mhm.
said the fucking opposite. Men need more time alone. And
Mhm.
I just mean in terms of, right, not every man, right? I don't know every man. This isn't just, baseline prescription, but it seems that most men today are around too many, you
Mm.
know, relationships or pseudo relationships, right?
Yeah, the
People that don't,
parasocial relationships.
right, parasocial. So I think it's actually a big detriment. Even the idea of, well, go touch grass, get outside. Sure, you should be outside. This isn't an inside versus outside argument. This is a your own frame, your own self, alone by yourself. I mean,
Mhm.
really alone.
Yeah.
Go 2 weeks without talking, and not that that's a super long time, but 2 weeks without talking to a single person. And I realize those of us in business or doing businesses have them. You can't do that in your business, but I just mean outside of anything that is necessary in terms of your finances, or right, you go to the grocery store, gas station, whatever. But outside of that, don't talk to a soul for a couple weeks. You see what I mean?
Mhm.
I don't think that most men are going to
Dude,
feel
I try
very
to do
comfortable.
that. I try to do that, and then people start blowing me up. I get like missing reports. I get on the back of milk cartons and shit.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. That's when you message them. You say you got alpha widowed, bitch.
oh shit.
But no, I think that really is an important thing, right? It's almost, and I'm not a history buff, right, about culture and such, but
Yeah,
this
it's
idea of like the, whatever tribe sending the teenage turning into a man out into the forest, out into
mhm.
the jungle to survive, he comes back man.
Right. Yeah, what I think it's Sartre who said if you're lonely when you're alone, you're in bad company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. No, very good
That's
point.
great.
I mean, yeah. And, doing that, going through that anecdotally, but nonetheless, it really helped me chisel and define more of my frame. Because this
Mhm.
it's just an interesting world going days and then weeks and even to some degree, not binarily, but months, and not talking to anyone, not having the reflection that you're perceiving from other people in your conversations, right? Like,
Mhm.
how do they react, right? That becomes a mirror for you. And too many people take their self esteem, what they would call frame, that we've kind of dissected into more of game, from other people, right? So it's not really their thought about themselves. It's more so, well, what are other people thinking about me?
Most people are NPCs, right? So they're
Yeah,
just
I call
mirroring
them GP, but
what
yes,
other
yeah,
people are doing. Yeah, but
yeah,
it's way less mental load to just copy other people than to actually have to think things through for yourself. And if you've never developed that muscle to figure everything out for yourself, you might not have the strength at first to do more than just copy the people around you. So yeah, I think that's a great starting place of having to start to do that for themselves.
and bleeding into, I don't know who said it, might have been Glenn, that people don't want to go towards hardship, right? Like that's not
Mhm.
realistic to create hardship. So interestingly, it yes and no, right? I mean, it's kind of a mixed bag here. So you don't want to, like, for instance, jump off a bridge to very potentially your death to be like, oh, I need hardship, right?
Mhm.
That's
Right.
fucking
Poke an
dumb.
eye out or something, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But meanwhile, exercising discipline, right?
Mhm.
Like, I don't want to do this run. And the thing is, whether I do it or not, nobody else on earth is going to care. And
Mhm.
whether I do it or not, within an hour from now, there's really no difference, right? Like I didn't lose weight. I'm not stronger. I'm not healthier per se, right, from doing it one time. So again, going back to the beginning of the conversation, people so infatuated with the short-term instant gratification goals, or not even goals, but just aspirations, and meanwhile, the long term, right, doing the right thing for the right reason, you don't see that shine, that glimmer, that snake oil. It's not as appealing, it's not as sexy. But meanwhile, the inevitable benefits of doing that more than not far outweigh the short term of, the sparkle and glitter and bullshit, right? The fugazi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, people give Jordan Peterson a hard time, but he's probably not wrong about maybe start with making your bed in the morning. Can you do that? And then go from there. Yeah. Before you think you're going to change the world or end capitalism or some crazy scheme, fix it. We're going to solve the war in the Ukraine. Maybe first see if you can just consistently make your bed for a week and go from there.
And as to the way that you do one thing is the way that you do everything.
Right.
And not that that's exactly precisely true, but there certainly is some truth to it. Right? If, for instance, if you, and look, this space full of cheating and thoughts and all this bullshit, but if you cheat on your woman in terms of, hey, woman, we're in a committed relationship and I'm going to be committed to you, and then you go out and fuck other women, but that's not me, that's him, but that's my friend. Granted, I'm not the woman, I'm his male man, platonic friend. But nonetheless, isn't he showing a lack of ethics, of morals?
Right.
Because he's not man enough to say to his woman, well, I'm not going to be exclusive with you. And I'm not saying he should or shouldn't do that, but the honesty, the integrity to say that when it's hard, but because it's true, because it's the right thing to do, or at least not to lie about it, right? To be like, oh, no, I just lied to my girlfriend, but I don't lie to my friends. I mean, maybe, but probably not. You probably are just a fucking liar in general.
And this is the issue of, because everything has become marketing based and personal brands and influencers and all this, everybody is obsessed with how the rest of the world sees them. And they've never developed that inner world of, well, what do I actually want to do? And how much do I really care what other people think? Right. And so that's very underdeveloped. And then excessively worrying about how everybody else sees them is overdeveloped. And that drives people crazy.
Yeah.
So
unhealthy, I would say. Just, it's just an unhealthy thing.
Yeah.
Right?
I would say that's always. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. You go.
I would say that's always been an issue throughout all of human history. But I would say social media now has taken it to the next fucking level. Because no one wants to publicize anything that's negative because they're not going to get the views and attention, but they're only willing to show their great sides, their wins and things like that. So, and then again, people will share their victimhood stories,
right? Which is different
at the same time. Yeah, that's it's like the opposite end of the scale,
right?
The part that gets me about that from the beginning is this is obviously curated. People are curating a particular look, but people treat it like it's more real than real life, right? Like a girl's going to judge you on your Instagram more than your interaction face to face. And that blows me away.
Yeah, that's fucking insane.
No.
I mean, when you really break that down, it's like I believe more in luck than reality, and
or how good you are at staging photos than the conversation we're having right now.
Well, you're right, that's part of it, and not even staging, but the levels of Photoshop or filtering and loss of context, it's just wild. The shit means nothing, and I got off all of them. I'm on Twitter still. I mean, I guess that's considered something, but the Facebook, the Instagram, that shit is so I don't miss it one single fucking bit. Not one bit. I'm so glad that I'm off of them. And I'm not saying they're the devil, they're the worst thing, but just in terms of it's so fake. I mean, it's just not real. It doesn't exist. I know it exists in a fucking computer hard drive where it was networked from, but it doesn't actually exist. You can't go there.
Part of it too is, and I try not to fuel the fire of generational warfare too much, but boomers have no sense of legacy. They're the first generation to their retirement plans. I tell you firsthand is they're going to, die broke is generally the advice that they get. That, hopefully the day they die is the day they hit zero in their bank account, or the last little bit is going to go to the nursing home. But again, because of that bubble of keeping stocks and housing artificially high in value, because that's where they're deriving their retirement income from,
right.
The subsequent generations, especially millennials, and I think even Gen Z now as well, they feel like they were never able to buy in on the ground floor of any of that, right? Like, why should I buy in at the all-time high and hope the greater fool theory is going to, go even higher when I need it? So they felt shut out from the ability to buy into those assets. So what did they have left over? They had social media, which the boomers didn't understand, and they could be influencers and make money that way. So that was an asset they could get in on the ground floor, or something like crypto, which again, because the boomers didn't understand it. And so those are the two things that have become hot for younger people, is because they're the assets they could get into. But because those are the only two, and because those aren't necessarily great assets, it's very distorted what those generations value as far as their life and chances for success.
So I want to bring this back again. Being in love versus what I would refer to as love. I think they're very different things. And I know this kind of a side note to what you're talking about, but I think it frames it well. So it doesn't really exist. The in love, what is described as being in love, is an emotional infatuation, right? It's superficial in a sense. The love is more of, I would die for you, even if you didn't know it, right? And this doesn't have to be a man-woman. It could be a, parent-child, whatever the case, right? But distinguishing
loyalty,
between
right?
that.
Yeah.
Say that again?
Loyalty.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a part of it. I mean, that certainly is. But I mean the love in terms of the selflessness of it. Whereas in love, there is a selfish aspect of, I mean, it seems in terms that said person loves me back, is in love with me back. Right. The reciprocation.
And it feels
factor.
good, and
Right, feels good. Yes.
So is there any way to move past that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that truth moves past that. The truth it always has moved past that, right? Because the truth always comes out. How many men, I mean, we talk about kind of young men, right? Incels or simps or whatever term. I prefer weak men in terms of, look, I put it that, somebody was throwing out, well, Alex from Playing with Fire does a great service. He teaches men how to date or, approach anxiety. And I said, that's fucking terrible. You're giving weak men dynamite. It's not a good thing. I know you think it's a good thing because your pockets are getting something from it. But if you didn't change the man, the core, the frame, but you just changed the game, essentially you created a little baby cobra snake oil salesman, right? What was the point of that? How is that ever going to help society?
So that's a fine line, right? I mean, on the one hand,
Agreed.
Men are desperate for mentors of, let's say you do have the potential to be a good man, but nobody's shown you the steps, and how do you get from there? So having someone to provide that guidance, I think there's a lack of that in general, and maybe you run across Alex, and Alex can show you how to actually fulfill your potential. But yeah, then the other is, I've definitely seen the guys who, I just want to learn the tricks to get my dick wet, and they're not doing anything useful with it other than they're just trying to game the system, and they're poisoning the well for everybody, because that's then why you have all these jaded women out there who think that every guy is trying to do that, and then they're on guard, or they're so emotionally burnt out that they only start looking for gold digging opportunities, and it just it poisons the whole environment.
I do agree with you, but let's bring it back a little bit. So you're talking about, for instance, the other side of what I mentioned, which I do agree with you on, is that some half of the men, whether it's half or not, are actually there to improve themselves, to then get the women, because this is a dating thing. This is a man-woman thing. My point would still be, in a sense, that this would be simping. If the ultimate goal is the woman, and I get it, I do understand, but it still comes full circle back to, well, the woman's on a pedestal. The goal must be independent of women, truly independent, in order for you not to fall into what then you will point at and say, that's simping. But
I've
that's
made
what
this
you're
argument
doing.
too. Yeah, it's very longhoused to make women the goal. Women are the nice to have extra that comes along with being successful and doing all the other things. If you make women the goal, you're worried about how do I do the things that they like and be the kind of person that they want to see, which means that they're in charge and you're not in charge of yourself. Yeah.
Right. So that's something I find interesting about this space. And I don't mean to just point out Alex, but, Fresh and Fit, whoever it is, there's a million dating coaches.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, I get it that that's the proximate goal for men. But the problem is the way their brains are thinking that is the proximate goal. And I understand it, but I'm just saying that it's very flawed.
Yeah, especially with, again, because we have this stasis or stagnation environment where the provisioning and protection, so-called beta qualities, are kind of assumed in general to be a given. So what we also see as a maladaptation for women is they seek out those so-called alpha, antisocial, kind of violent felon, hybristophilia tendencies. And now we're training a generation of men of go act like that. And that's not good for society to be everybody to be the asshole.
But to them, that's the proximate goal in a manner of putting it, right? They're like, well, if I'm just more alpha, right? I kind of joked about, the guy with the mask on driving to the grocery store during the lockdown. And he's like, I'm a badass finally. And it's like, no, you're actually not. But this is a step forward for you, perhaps, right? I got kicked out of a cheesecake factory. I mean, I'm just kind of joking here, but I got kicked out of a cheesecake factory for refusing to put my mask on. And here's the thing, Cheesecake Factory is garbage, but there was context to it. It made sense at the moment. And they brought out the manager. There was like 5 women, I swear. There was like 5 women behind the counter at one point. Like, you need to leave, They're like, put on the mask. And I was like, why? Everyone's sitting down without a mask. And now I have to put one on while I'm standing up. I know I'm going into a different argument here, but my point is it's kind of silly in terms of, like, one thing will not make us, but we are made of a accumulation of our actions, right? So the more that you do what you know is right, in a way, and I'm not saying I was right, by the way, but I think I was right.
But are you doing it to appease someone else, right? If the goal is I'm going to behave in the way that women in a deep-seated biological way find innately attractive. I mean, that certainly is true, and I'm sure it works.
Yes.
But you don't necessarily want, that may not be the best, the best thing for society overall. Maybe women have to learn that men shouldn't act like that, and it should not be given men who act that way as well. Maybe there has to be some other mechanism. There's a reason why those kinds of guys get policed by other guys of, don't act like that. That's why they're considered antisocial or jerks. Yeah.
Stop talking about me like that.
I thought Glenn was on mute.
So what I'm reading from this then, guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, is men are trying to control the world around them rather than trying to control the only thing they can control, which is themselves.
Out of what I would say is fear. We didn't get to this part yet, but I would say that a lot of it is from the stance, from the frame of fear, which I think is an incredibly dangerous place to operate from. And I know we all do it. I'm not saying that I have never done this or I'd never do it, right? Fear is natural, but nonetheless, when your decisions are based on fear, or I'm trying to think of what we were referring to earlier, like having a safe bet, like placing a safe bet, right? You're not playing to win, you're playing not to lose.
You're playing
That's a very different.
You're not willing to take the risk.
How much can you trust a weak man, right? That they're going to betray you as they're in a vulnerable position, right? So you can't rely on them for anything, which is why men used to have all these tests among each other of like, are you really going to be there when are you going to have that?
No, it was that's the burden of performance for men, but it was also like the what is it? The rites of passage.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, this is part of it, and I know we've talked about in the nuance, like for instance,
AKA hazing.
Should all men have to join the military, right? Should it be mandatory? That's a nuance of it,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's a decent point. I mean, it's not wrong in a sense, right? A rite of passage in terms of, right? You're 18 or 18,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to drink and smoke, and granted, you can't at 18 technically, but nonetheless, you want to vote? Are you willing to put blood on the line
Right.
potentially?
Yeah.
And the man next to you, or, in some cases of history, the boy next to you, right? We've had
Mm-hmm.
12, 14-year-olds fighting fucking wars that
Yeah.
did more badass shit than I ever did.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Karl von Clausewitz was 12 years old when he first went off to war. Like that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a real hardening slope. I can't imagine. And look, I was in the infantry, Marine Corps, and we headed off to Afghanistan a couple times, kind of subverged into other things. But nonetheless, I was prepared as best as I could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very scared. I'm just telling you, like on the ship, hey, we're going, it's hot. This is like 2008. It was kind of popping. And that fear is real.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I would have reacted. I could obviously sit here now and say, oh, I would have been a badass, right? I don't know. I'm not here fronting like I'm Billy Badass. There's real fear in that. I mean, it's a scary situation. There are certainly people that I was with one day and they were gone the next.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is a fact. I mean, it's weird shaking a dude's hand or getting knife hand, getting chewed out, whatever the case, and couple weeks later, yeah, he got crushed. I mean, it's
Was your most death experience when you got stabbed by the pitchfork?
yeah, the woman. I mean, look, my experience in the Marine Corps was in training. There's a ridiculous amount of times that it's unbelievable I'm still alive in training. Mm-hmm. And there's many guys in training that didn't make it out. I'm not saying most, but there's plenty of incidents where trucks rolled over, the flying coffins, helicopters, crashed into each other, or mountains. I mean, sometimes multiple times a week. And it was like in Camp Pendleton training. And it was like, holy shit, like this is wild. But anyways, even at that, the building of stress tolerance, it didn't,
right.
I'm not saying that it made me like that was the one thing, but that was certainly a stepping stone, a very big one towards where I was and where I am now, right, in terms of my own frame.
Yeah, I mean, men especially need that, and because it is a longhouse society, the cliche of men are treated as defective women, but there's a real lack of that. For that reason, is that those opportunities are not made available because it's underemphasized. Instead, it's that managerialist track of how do we keep people safe and sedate and predictable and efficient little workers, and not, a female livestock is easier to domesticate than male livestock. I really think that's what it comes down to. As far as we're all the tax cattle, if we're all acting like women, that makes it easier for the managers to manage us.
Yes. Yeah. Right. The emotional, and I mean, even in that kind of like nuance, when men get emotional, and I'm not saying I've never done this, like I kind of preface with, I don't want to seem holier than thou or anything like that. But when we do that, when we get overly emotional, even when, we feel what happened was unjustified, let's say it was unjustified, it just objectively was, and we overreact with our emotions, a lot of times I think we feel guilty about that, and we should feel guilty in a sense that something is off, that we weren't able to control our emotions, and I think thereafter funnel it into our purpose in a general sense, like something positive.
Yeah, there's a few things there. I mean, one is I often compare it to the same way you get potty trained as a child. Is your ability to control your emotions is like your ability to control your bowels. It doesn't mean you don't do it, but it means that you know how to do it at the appropriate times and places. And we have a culture that doesn't teach people how to be potty trained with their emotions, so they just let it out. They pee their pants in public, and it's embarrassing.
No, we give
well,
them
no, we have taught men
catheters.
to do that. We taught men it's okay to do that.
Yeah,
we made them defected women.
If peeing your pants is cool, call me Miles Davis.
Oh,
hey, Miles.
The other is I think men are going to rediscover their capacity for hard power. Female power is much more soft power of reputation damage and manipulating how people think about you and what the memories are. It's like that Louis C.K. bit of, a man will chop your arm off or burn your house down, but a woman will shit inside your soul. And it's way more devastating. But when men don't have that, okay, make fun of my reputation all you want, I'm going to, unalive you, and that settles it real quick.
Yeah.
I think we're going to find out that if there's not the training that is supposed to go along with that for to use it judiciously and with an understanding of what the consequences are, the man children who find it out on their own and start experimenting with that, we're not going to get good results from that. It's going to be very dangerous, like the kid who finds his father's gun.
Well, not even going to. Well, I don't know exactly.
We have, right?
Well, yeah, I was going to say currently we're seeing quite a bit of that. Mm-hmm. And it's funny. I hopped on this stream last night. It was random as fuck, and it was my 4.4%. Right? They were, it was pretty. Yeah. So I was only on it for like a half hour, and I did get some.
Did you show up a half hour late?
No. Right. Well, yeah.
If you show up on time, you're losing that 4.4%.
So there was this one dude on there, and he was, getting into the stuff. If this XYZ happens, I got my people. It was this type of thing. Mm-hmm. And I said to him at one point, I'm like, "This sounds very emotional. Are you sure that your open wounds, or rather that you aren't scarred up, that your wounds aren't still open in the sense of?" I think he was like 42. He mentioned it. And look, you still haven't, in the terms, not that I'm the one to judge, but you're showing lack of manhood. Right? You're showing a lot of emotionalism. And I tried to balance how I put it. I didn't know any of the people on there. And he seemed to be somewhat receptive, because other people were actually echoing what I was saying, the host of it. And he kind of stepped back and he said, nah, this is good. And I think what he was kind of getting at is that he was using this to vent, but it was a lot of immaturity. And I get it. I've been there. So I'm not trying to pass judgment, but I was just trying to let him know that, look, I understand. It's not that your feelings aren't valid. It's that I don't think you really trust yourself yet, because you're still fighting, what other people are thinking and saying versus what you do. And so the frame is rather weak. Mm-hmm. And, one thing he had mentioned in the beginning when I first hopped on, I, caught wind of, he's like, people haven't been through what I've been through. I've gone through so much. It was this type of thing. And in my mind, what I'm thinking is, well, let's say that's true. Let me just, okay, I'll oblige you. You haven't actually overcome it to still be in this state. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm getting at? Like, these wounds are still open. They're infected. You haven't cleaned them up yet.
Yeah. And there's a lot of truth, too, that in a crisis, you're not going to rise to the occasion. You're going to fall to your level of training, that you've got to actually work through those things. And it needs to just become a calm, collected instinct rather than thinking like, oh, I'm so amped up to like, that's not how it's going to play out in real life.
Yeah. It was a lot of emotionalism, and it's ironic that a lot of what is purported to be, maybe not in terms, but I mean, it just is implied that this is masculine behavior when I come in, this type of thing. And the truth of the matter is, if you're reacting out of emotions, and that probably is the case, we're making a, this is experimental theory.
What is it? Sailor's law of if they're more unalived than injured, it's a white kid, and if it's more injured than unalived, it's a black kid. That, like, it's who's actually put in the training and has that psycho discipline versus where it's more about showing off and kind of the chest thumping of I could fire out shots, as opposed to no, they really mean to do some damage.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's both sides of it for sure. So we got some, I don't know, Leroy, did we have some questions to answer here?
Yeah, there was a couple. So Mr. Pitt wanted to know, does the panel think that productive deflation is desirable means to get inflation back to 2%? Is it even possible to achieve productive deflation at this point?
Can you put it up?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So this kind of question can very easily come into like, well, how do you define inflation? Yeah. The important thing, rather than trying to focus on a target, because this also ends up opening up a Goodhart's law, which is something like Fresh and Fit. We're getting, oh, you got to bang 50 girls. I'm like, well, as soon as you set that as a target, the quality of the girls you bang are going to go in the shitter. Like,
yes, absolutely.
Same sort of thing with trying to target some inflation, like, oh, it should be 2%. The important thing is all wealth is the result of increased efficiency of capital structure. It's because you make things that make your time and labor more efficient so that you have more time and resources to then do other things. That's where that comes from. So forget what the inflation rate is or a lot of this other stuff. It's a much more relevant question is the credit or money's flow going into things that are productive that are deflationary, or is it going to other things? And if it's going to those other things, that's part of the problem. If it's going into something that actually makes capital structure more efficient, that's the only place you're getting any real resources from.
All right. I'd like to know as well, Sean, could you post in some of your links for your books and stuff like that, just in case people are interested in what you say and they want to have a look at your actual readings and see what's going on for themselves?
Yeah.
Or where can they find this sort of stuff?
We'll put something in the show notes after this is over. I can look that up.
Yep. Perfect. And let me see, what else do we have here?
Yeah, good point, Leroy. I forgot to mention that as well.
And someone wanted to know, have you read the book The Fourth Turning?
Yes. It does run the risk of kind of being like Myers-Briggs, where or like fortune telling, where you can make anything fit the model. But the general idea of that we're headed towards some kind of crisis and that there's a generational component to how each generation has kind of like a collective outlook. I think there's some validity to that as well. So, I wouldn't use it as prophecy, but there's, I think you can say that circumstances seem to fit as well. And especially that we're hitting a point of a crisis and that it's probably going to be Gen X who remembers the most about how the world used to be, that figures out how to build the world post-crisis that everybody else is going to live in.
Yeah. So I've got a thought in my head. I'm kind of trying to piece it together here. I think what I'm thinking is, are we not going to get to a stage now where, because we have so many emotional men and we're leading into harder times, we are going to create the times then where strong men will come to the front? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I hope so. I mean, we're definitely seeing that competency crisis now. How bad does it have to get before competent, good men take charge?
Right.
Yeah, that's a great open question. I think it could get a lot worse before we see people.
I think it will get worse. Yeah, I mean, to your point, you're saying that it can get. I think that we are going to see things get quite a bit worse before they get better. But things will get better, right? I mean, history repeats for the good and bad. And, I think optimistically we would hope that, we get that much better, that things get less bad next time or whatever the case.
The biggest danger is in thinking that a collapse will happen suddenly. I mean, I know there it is, at first slowly and then suddenly, but
Right.
the slow collapse could be the next 40 to 50 years. I mean, it took 70 to 80 years for communism in the Soviet Union to collapse. So people could be born and die in that space of time.
Sure.
I think if you're solutions oriented, it helps to try to do things now. If it's just going to be slowly get worse for the rest of your life and you want to have kids and want to get married and want to do something with your life, you're going to have to figure out a way to do that now regardless. Don't wait for the collapse to be like, as soon as things go to shit, then I'm finally going to be king of the wasteland. Like you may die waiting for that to happen.
No, I mean, look, I agree with that in terms of, people put themselves, myself included, right? Again, I include me, into boxes, right? And these boxes are not physical, but they're psychological, I think would probably the best way to frame them. In terms of we see limits and we want to wait for XYZ to happen before we can get out of said box into a new box or whatever the case. And I think to some degree, right, the balance, right? We've talked about balance. It's good to look at the future, right, in terms of whether it's your investments, your purpose, etc., but also living day to day. And both of them have value. Now, we do see in society people only valuing living day to day. We see too much of that, no doubt about it. And there's also some people who are only living in the future or the past. So I think coming back to balance, which is kind of the milquetoast gray area point of like, boring, this type of shit. But really, truly, as we balance ourselves, we're going to be doing better, much better than, just is it left or right? Is it up or down? This type of thinking, right? This binary, it has to be this way. I want my box to look like this. And it might not look the way that you want, that you perceived. But if it's good, if it's right, if this is what's coming to you, then, right, survival of the fittest, not the strongest, the fittest, right? That you're able to adapt and overcome in a general sense.
Yeah, I'm as guilty of this as anybody, but don't be a theory cell. Like, don't just, live entirely in your head or, and we're all on a live stream podcast, but do other things too, even if it's just going to the gym with your friend, like just do something and things will come from that.
Yeah.
So gentlemen, I've got another question. I'd say a large part of the issue is we have, the solutions are all cross-generational. Nothing is going to happen very quickly. And I think we used to build things and a lot of things used to be cross-generational. People don't think like that anymore. And knowing that the solution is cross-generational, how can we get people to think of these problems knowing that they can't be solved right now? They need to be solved over a long period of time. Because again, everyone wants their quick fix right now.
I got an answer to that, but I'll yield to Glenn or Sean.
I'm going to defer to Sean.
Sean.
We're right back to the high time preference conundrum, right? That everything in an egalitarian society is, vote for me on November 5th, and I'll give you all the things that you want. It's people aren't willing to make those long-term investments.
Right.
I don't know that people are going to be, I mean, like you were saying, of people don't run towards hardship until it's thrust upon them that they don't have a choice other than to do the hard work of investing for the long haul. I mean, other than self-selected people who can see that intellectually and are willing to make that sacrifice, I think it'll come to them more than it'll be something that they can choose to enact.
Yeah. So here's the angle I'm going to take, right? So you said, Leroy, that, right, like change isn't going to happen now. It's going to happen in the future. But I do agree with you. However, some things do happen quickly and we can't always perceive what they are. But the point is, it's not to say that nothing will be affected. It will all be in the future. There will be some things that will happen immediately or more instantly. And other things, the long term will take time, no doubt about it. But I think one way to transcend those times without simply getting to the whole, well, it's going to be 50 years in the future. Are you all right with that? You're going to be dead, by the way. One way to transcend that type of talk is your children.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean that very sincerely, is that if you're making the world, whether it's in small ways or big ways, but overall a better place, then you're directly and indirectly helping them. Even though it will be quote unquote the future, it will become their present. Do you see what I'm saying?
And that's probably the same reason why the managerial elite are so anti-natalist. You know, once people have children, they have that sense of legacy and they're willing to make those investments. So if you're going to convince a whole group of people to not do that, what better way than, you know, for them to be, dual income, no kids until they're 50 or 60 years old.
So to, who's this? Shu Tai?
Yeah, Shu Tai's a homie.
Yeah. So I got something to tell you here. So one thing that we've talked about is knowing these things that you're saying that are true, right? I hear you. We see these things. Is using that information, that knowledge, right? The knowledge is power, to be even more discretion based, right? Good discernment, to take your time, to be patient with women. And I don't just mean be patient if they're having a hissy fit. I mean be patient in terms of taking your time with steps, right? You already know the steps. Right? We kiss, we do other things, we move in, we get married, we have kid, right? And not necessarily in that order, but nonetheless, to use good discernment, right? To be patient, that will help your cause, because you are correct that there's more legal ramifications and social ramifications, right, than perhaps 50 years ago or 100 years ago, certainly. So it's not just that things are bad. Right, I know that we can look at them as bad, but you exercising more of your own frame, knowing that, like, look, oh, she's perfect in every way, but she's kind of a thought, or she's a little bit of a liar, or, you know, these things that we want to brush underneath the carpet, and nobody's perfect, but nonetheless, that you want to say, well, my emotions, right, the sexual gratification, whatever it is, that's outweighing whatever this problem is. I'll fix her, you know, etc. It's often a cope, right? Because you're feeling that desperation that, well, if she's gone, who else is going to be there? Well, when you're good with the answer being, I don't give a fuck if anyone's there. When you're good with that, and you can stand on your own frame and not live in the fear that we were just talking about of these things or of her gone, then I think you're in a much better position regardless of the external circumstances. Because if it's true to you, she will then by virtue read that. And maybe that means that she's gone, or maybe she means she stays. But either way, if you're being true to yourself, you're far less likely to deal with these things if you take your time, exercise good judgment.
Yeah, don't be too eager to hit those milestones, right? Oh, I got to meet a girl, and then we got to get married, and then we got to have kids. You alluded to Starship Troopers earlier, service guarantee citizenship, and something given has no value. That if you give away your loyalty and all the things you're going to do too easily, it's not going to be valued. You know, if you,
I think guys just need to make women earn it more. You know, the higher standards, higher criteria. Just because she wants to touch your pee-pee or she touched your pee-pee doesn't make she's a keeper.
Right.
I've been guilty of this, for real. I've been guilty.
Oh, same.
There's a lot of women that don't deserve your pee-pee.
Right. Yep. But, you know, here's the thing, though, Glenn. They actually did because your frame was fucked up. Right? Because
no.
You were willing to accept it.
They didn't deserve it. I was intoxicated.
But you see what I'm saying? Is that the more you accept it, you're buying into that. You're like, well, it is. But I do agree with you. But I'm just saying the other side is, if your frame was stronger, you wouldn't have accepted that in the first place, regardless of what any dating coach or red pillar told you. That you just know this is disrespectful, or this.
Andrew Tate told me to, man.
Yeah, I mean, he a good source.
That is the part that Myron has the right general idea of.
Yeah,
once you've had enough experience and been with enough women, it's not it's not that amazing. Like,
why,
like
is it sex? Is that like, because like, look at the extreme. You got like the extreme would be like John Anthony Lifestyle. He's fucked so many women that fucking dudes with tits is now the next turn on for him. You know,
I
never want to sleep with that many women.
That's what you call going full retard, right?
No, and that's going gay. Gay.
We're turning going out.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
But it's coming from a place of I see this a lot. There's a lot of these guys where they, you know, I'm a total dork too. So, you know, if you didn't get laid a lot when you were younger, and then you finally figure out some of the tools and tricks to get laid, and then you're like, I got to catch up for lost time, or I'm finally going to show them. And they go overboard the other way, and they never learn a healthy balance of like, you know, if you were denied ice cream as a kid, and then as an adult, you can buy your own ice cream. That's great. But if you've eaten 30 pints of ice cream, maybe be like, okay, ice cream's fine, but you know, it's not that great. You know, you can learn moderation, and that you don't need it all the time. You don't have to crave it like some kind of addiction, that you put it in its proper place. And I think that's the part that a lot of guys, they never get to that next step of like you're saying, oh, I could take it or leave it. It's not that important to me.
Right. But to truly mean it versus saying it. And I'm not saying that you were just saying it, but I just mean that, right, a lot of guys in this kind of this space of, you know, kind of trying to find that balance are almost in the frame of, you know, I'll take anything. I mean, I think that's most dudes, is they'll take anything. But getting to the point where they can literally push women away that they should push away, but they wouldn't have pushed away, you know, a year ago or 5 years ago or whatever, because of that desperation factor. But once that leaves, right, there is a curve to it.
Or the FOMO, right? We live in this age of everybody's, you know, oh, what am I? It's like, man, you ain't missing anything. It's all kind of the same, you know.
I think a lot of people just feel unworthy. Yeah. And whenever they can get anything, then they're just happy enough to take it.
I've also never seen so much imposter syndrome as recent generations as well, where even when people are successful, they don't think they really deserve the success that they have. And I'm like, what? Like, you put in the hard work, you clearly got the results, and yet there's something going on in their brain or mental frame that they still don't feel worthy of what they have.
Well, what do you think?
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, though. It depends what level it's going to.
It's not the same thing as humility. It's on an extreme of where they end up sabotaging. Yeah. I mean, I'm talking guys in happy marriages where they don't think they deserve a good woman, and then they're out cheating on their spouse because, you know, they're actually that shitty guy. And it's a whole other mental health thing that they've got to be like, no, if you've got a good thing going, it's because you made it happen. Enjoy it, take care of it.
So why do you think that happens? I mean, I have an answer, but I want to ask you, why do you think that happens, that imposter syndrome or not feeling worthy? I mean, to both of you. Do you have ideas? I do, but I want to hear from
closest I could figure is it's kind of the whole helicopter parent participation trophy thing of, you know, when you get praise for everything, you don't know how to value actual praise, or you can't tell the difference between real and fake rewards. And so they're always miscalibrated as far as being able to judge that. It's something like that seems to be the issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I would go pretty much along the same lines. But I would say it's also to do with being ever so slightly feminized over time. Men aren't really told to be proud of their accomplishments. They're told that that's like a toxic masculinity instead, you know? So you're put down for your achievements. That's what it says is part of the problem.
Or the feminine trait of it's never good enough, right? You always have to have more and bigger. And it's like, no, man, if sometimes hey, I'm good.
You know, the other side is they're actually right. And what I mean by that is they don't deserve it in terms of, even if on paper they're 6'5" and 6-pack and, you know, 20-foot dick and all this bullshit.
You're describing me.
Yeah, even if they're Leroy. You know, in a sense, their frame, that what they believe of themselves, right? When they're alone, like we talked about alone time and real alone time, not just, I woke up today and my girl had left to work already. Not that shit. I mean, you're really truly alone. That they're missing that core strength. And so, in a sense, they're actually correct when they say they don't deserve it. Maybe on paper they do. Maybe they're a good, meaning man. But I believe a good man is a strong man. And by the way, I'm not saying I'm that. But nonetheless, I do believe good and strong for men is synonymous. I don't believe that power and good are synonymous by any means. Power, the way I look at it, is simply leverage. So that doesn't facilitate good or bad moral. It just is potential energy.
Yeah, I could accept that.
Yeah. Of course you can. I said it. No, but this is what we do. We like to, I do, I especially do, like to flesh out these ideas, these concepts, what we have observed, right? Semi-researched, I guess, with other men. And I think this is what more men need, is to be able to do this, or at least be able to interact with it. And by the way, chat, thank you. In terms of, we've had some great questions. Throughout, I do see a lot of these. And look, there's certainly people. I've pretty much started off with no channel. This is like my who knows how many channel. I'm trying not to lose this one or anything like that. But there's been a good, just organic following, right? I don't ask for anyone to come over. I've pretty much omitted doing any of the clips or shorts or any kind of oil. It's just talks like this, right? There's not a lot of glimmer or shine. It's just us conversing and being authentic. And I think that's important.
It's definitely important, man, but I would also say it's growing. Not just this channel, but long form chats. Yeah. People do really enjoy them, like with the boom of podcasts and stuff like that. So there is definitely a need and a want out there from a lot of people to hear these things being flushed out. Yeah. It's just on the other side of the coin, then we've got the option to pause and go through 5 minutes of a fucking video, and people don't have the attention span for it. But I'd say we just kind of need to get rid of these instant gratification things. And I'd love to know, gentlemen, I've seen that DeSantis has banned social media for people under 14. What's your thoughts on that?
So my initial thought is,
somebody's doing the parents' job, thank God.
Yeah, exactly. Well, half exactly. Somebody's doing the parent job, but I also see that as a negative. That's also a reflection of parenting, right? That we would even have an epidemic or whatever you want to relate it to, worthy of the state imposing more restrictions. And granted, this one sounds, it sounds good, right? It doesn't sound bad. I don't think most adults should be on that shit, let alone kids, or at least on the level that we're at, right? In terms of so much fake ego, hubris bullshit coming from these parasocial relationships. And even with the app itself I think in a sense is a parasocial relationship, right? You almost feel like you're somewhere. You're not anywhere. You're on your fucking phone. You're nowhere. You're wherever you are, but you're ignoring all this to focus in on, right, like this.
So do you believe it's going to be net negative or net positive?
Well, again, it sounds good. I don't know if it'll be negative. Look, there's a butterfly effect that I cannot account all for, but it sounds good on the surface. I guess we'll have to see.
So
I'm just, yeah, sure. I'm just, it's not good that we have to do that, right? And so it doesn't solve the real problem, the core issue, that parents aren't taking care of this themselves, the individuals. And I would start with a father, right? Again, going back to weak men. You need the state to tell you, oh, you know what, daughter? I know I got you iPhone 15 Pro Max and you got all the apps you want and you're wearing, belly shirts and all this bullshit and makeup at 14 years old. But look, it's not my fault. The government said that you can't use social media. Well, why weren't you man enough to do that for your daughter, despite the social pressures? And I realize it's not easy, but nonetheless, you needed her real daddy to step in, right? The government.
And it's the right. It's the latest in a long trend. I mean, the state has been raising your kids. That's what K through 12 public education is that the state is raising your kids. And what's that saying of, we send our children to Rome and then we're surprised when they come home as Romans. Like, yeah,
Right.
of course, they're not going to listen to you. They're going to listen to their real parents that they spend 8 hours a day with, which is their teachers, who are collecting a government paycheck to teach your kids whatever crazy belief system, they've been trained to.
Right.
So yeah, if you want parents to take back control, man, that's a comprehensive agenda of pull your kids out of public school. Somebody get your wife or somebody to homeschool them or get them into some program that you actually trust.
And you have
But
to
see that costs money that these parents can afford because they barely make any money from the government and the welfare doesn't cover that. And her other 4 kids, they don't even know who the father is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that back and say, well, look, resource is an issue with what you're saying, but to bring it back to accountability on men, therefore, you shouldn't have kid before you have said resource, knowing what it's like today, knowing what it will take to extract your kids from that environment, to protect your family by different mechanisms from that environment. So I'm not saying it's all the parents' fault, but I also wouldn't say it's all the state or government's fault, right? There's fault in each, but I would think that men would take the ultimate accountability of being an individual, of being a man, where he is going to do his best due diligence, whether he learned late like myself or he learns early, in order to place some of those mechanisms to then be able to protect his family. And if the argument is, well, he only makes $40K a year and he's disabled or some shit, I don't know, whatever the argument is, well, look, there's always a way. Maybe the way is you're going to be, I don't know exactly, but somewhere in northeast Canada in the wilderness, and, you're going to be living off the grid and you don't need money, you hunt. And I'm not saying that's realistic. I'm just saying there is always a way. One question is, are you willing to do it? And I don't think most people would be willing to do what I just described.
And is it dysgenic that the men who don't do that and take the easy way out and are the deadbeats are also the one who have 5 different baby mamas and they're the ones having the kids, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the attractive quality to especially immature women of the, that antisocial hybristophilia behavior.
Well, and even when you say immature women, there's a lot of other factors that add to that. For instance, the women ever, but let's just look at today, are being are being funneled by the government, the men around them, and when I say men, I mean starting with the father, are not protecting them from said things, and so they're falling more into this same trap that we're talking about. And it's making it more difficult for them to not do those things because they're being trained and taught. And the one person, starting with father, but, maybe father's dead or he's gone or whatever, but whoever the strongest man in their life is not able to protect them from those mechanisms and then from themselves, then utilizing those mechanisms. So this is where I disagree with a lot of the red pill creators in terms of they talk about, oh, women are not as smart, they're not as powerful, they're not as strong, they're not as this and that and that and that. And a lot of it I agree with, maybe all of it, I don't know. But then when it comes to accountability, oh, well, women should have the same accountability as men. Well, yes, to some degree in certain terms, like as adults. But when you look at the structure of mankind, it's always fallen upon men. And then those same men will say, well, they have so many laws on their side and they have all. Yes, but who is enforcing those laws? It's men. So I don't know what you're talking about. right? They want their cake and to eat it too. A lot of the red pill, propagandist podcasters, I don't think it's really red pill, but what they promote versus the other side, the feminists. Mm-hmm. In some sense, it's the same exact thing, just different sides.
It's like conservatism is just progressivism driving the speed limit. It's just the light version of the same thing. Yeah.
Mm.
So I'd like to just bring up what Uncle Guns has said here.
Uncle Guns.
Just a quick question about this. So if we had a parallel economy and a parallel society, do you not think that would breed massive potential for civil war and stuff like this? Because no one's willing to lose their stake and their power.
Or people fighting with the Amish. I think the Amish are actually a good example of polarization, that you have communities that live side by side peacefully but separately.
Yep, they are, but they don't have much power or control. So to see, big government's power slip away to this parallel economy or parallel society would be seen as a threat. And that's what I think could breed loads of trouble. Any thoughts?
Which side is more competent to accomplish that? Which side is going to be capable of exerting its will on the other?
And with that, do you see potentials for civil strife?
We have civil strife now, right? What's the...
I'm talking about civil war level.
I feel like that's... we're dealing with a competency crisis. So how are they going to organize that level of response? That requires a level of competency that so far they've demonstrated that they don't have. They had to bail on Afghanistan, right?
When you say bail on, not to interrupt you, but when you say bail on Afghanistan, right? I was part of this, and one thing I thought was very interesting. 20 years later. Right. 20 years later, they said, I don't want to say it, but, that they are stronger than ever. And my first thought was, what the fuck were we doing then?
Yeah.
Right? They're stronger than ever after all these dead brothers and on their side, when I say their side, I mean within the country, innocent women, children, etc., who were casualties of this. And then you say they're stronger than ever. I didn't mean to sidetrack this, but yeah.
No, I'm sure you've seen Generation Kill that was on HBO, and Captain Nathan Fick. That was his argument, and he came from a Ivy League background and chose to become a Marine, and that's exactly what he saw too. It's what we're doing here is making more people want to fight us. That's the opposite of the mission they signed up for.
Right. Mm-hmm. Counterintuitive. Or productive, I guess, both. Yeah. Sad. Absolutely sad.
Do you have any questions for us, Sean? We've been fucking questioning you endlessly.
Yeah. We've been interrogating you.
What do you think is the most important thing? I know the conversation, but in addition to that, the most important thing that you could be doing to improve the situation as you see it? Is there one thing that is your active project in that regard beyond this podcast or these conversations?
Oh, okay. Do you want to go first? I got it, but
I would say working on myself, building a family with the same values that I have, and teaching them to do exactly the same fucking thing. And I think there's a butterfly effect from that. My children will do exactly the same. They will continue to do the same. And we will propagate from that a great family structure and a solid foundation. And hopefully that will be inspirational to those all around them. And my ideas will go throughout society, throughout them. And I'll leave a legacy that my family will be proud of, others will recognize, and hopefully that will inspire others to do exactly the fucking same.
Leroy must be rubbing off on me because
not that way.
Not that way. Why is that got to be implied?
Because we need to bring the bar down now and again, make it lowbrow.
Because you sound gay.
So look, you have to be the change that you want to see, right? Words of JFK. I mean, there have been some good leaders throughout history in different ways. It doesn't have to be politically who have echoed these sentiments. And I think to Leroy's point, that everything starts at home. Now, granted, if you can't do, then maybe you can teach, right? Rocky and Mickey, right? Whatever the case, but if we can instill these values, and not just through, but I do agree with Leroy, our own family, the people around us physically outside of this space, right? Because you're saying aside from this, then it's people we interact with. And sometimes that means being nice to somebody who needs it, who really needs it. And usually, if I'm saying they need it, it's probably usually a woman, and I don't mean in a sexual way, but maybe it's an older woman that needs help with her groceries, and I'm not saying we should all be running out doing that, but my point is, maybe it's being nice, maybe it's being stern, right? Maybe it's telling somebody to shut the fuck up. I mean, it can come out in a lot of ways, but I think bringing back to balance, that if we're balancing who we are, our ethics, our morals, to move forward in a way that is good for us and therefore good for the people around us. I mean, not to make this corny, but I'm just saying that those little effects then have butterfly effects. Right. And at a very basic level, everyone can do that. If they're improving, then they're going to be bringing more of the good things to other people around them, even if not purposely, even incidentally. Right? Somebody seeing you on your mission, somebody seeing you not be distracted, right? There's many ways we could frame that. That will be inspiring to others. And some it won't be, some it will be. But the point is, if you're doing it for the right reason, you're going to have a good effect.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
This is what we all need to do. This is what we need to do. Okay. You know what? Y'all talking about like getting married and like saving, raising.
I didn't say
kids.
that.
No. What y'all need to do is go save them hoes and then wipe them all up and have like 8 wives and then teach them not to be hoes no more, but then have kids with all them and then just multiply and all that shit. But you got to go save the hoes first.
Wait. With all of them? How many kids are you going to have, Glenn?
Look, you got to have an army.
We need to have a harem.
Exactly.
Have a harem.
Look, when your child support is 17% per kid, and then you have
but if you have
50
more than
of them,
10,
and then you have
10, they can't get you. Ask Nick Cannon.
I mean, I don't want to ask him about that, but oh man, look, guys, it's been a real good one.
Yeah,
I definitely appreciate all of you being here, Sean, Leroy, Glenn. Thank the 3 of you and everyone onlooking, watching. I'm glad that you came and joined us. I hope somebody got something from this. I'll tell you what, if nobody else got anything from this, I did. And that's the only thing that matters.
Any last words for us, Sean? Any words of wisdom before we pop off?
I'm glad I could bring an adult tone to the conversation tonight.
Yeah,
I hope
thank
you all
you.
had fun. And,
you taught us. You led the way, Sean. we would have been hella immature. You don't even know. I mean,
look, I'm lucky I held out as long as I did. Why do you think I was quiet? He was being that smart, and I was like,
"Fuck, I can't compete."
What street did I get on tonight? Wasn't the one I was expecting.
Good, very good. Where can do a little shout out here, Sean? I don't know if this video will ever do anything big, but give a shout out.
So my handle is Sean Does It on Instagram and Telegram. We'll share in the show notes, especially once my book actually gets published. And I'm always interested in helping people who are looking to sell their business, especially if they don't want to pay taxes when they sell, or the commercial real estate, or even crypto. They can avoid taxes on that too. So any way that we can help each other and build up the community of our guys, we can do all those things we talked about of creating that high trust society.
Excellent.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I might. I've been kind of putting reading off. I did a whole bunch of reading over like the last few years, and in the last few months, I've kind of put it aside. But I will put you in my catalog. I usually have a few books I'm looking to read at one time, and
He doesn't. He lies.
I'm a liar. Clip it. Clip it.
He reads comic books.
That I don't do. But yeah, what about Glenn? What you got going on, Glenn? I mean, anyone here should know who you are. But...
Nah, I'm just starting some trouble, you know. Oh, you know what, guys? Actually, this would be a great topic. Yeah. I have a topic I want to cover. It's about porn stars and why porn fucks up women like really bad. Have you noticed like the last like month and a half, 2 months, like 3 or 4 porn star has like either like been killed. Emily Willis like in a vegetable state after like ODing. Again, it happens to them all after retirement. It's not like while they're getting dick down. No, it's after they get no more dick, and now they think they're ugly. And
it's dick withdrawal.
Yeah, dick withdrawal. Like they're used to that insemination all the time, and just.
So you're gonna save them?
Yeah, we gotta save them, guys. We gotta catch them all like Pokemon.
All right. I mean, I'm trying to stay away. I've been doing pretty well.
No, but like I really wanted to cover the topic from like the sense of like, you know, ladies, you got to think about this. Look at this like outcome here. The outcome is not very beneficial. And guys that are consuming it or that are want it in demand, you are contributing to this outcome per se.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah. No. Agreed. Yeah. No. I mean,
I was thinking that maybe we could hit it on something like that kind of angle.
Okay. Yeah.
Like not hit it, but you know what I mean. Like
no, don't hit it.
Don't hit it.
Be safe.
But cover it. No, I mean address it.
Boom. Safe language.
Okay.
Safe language.
Look at you, all grown up. Fucking Glenn, all grown up.
Man, I'm almost up to all grown and shit. You need to go do some childish shit again.
All right, Leroy. Leroy, you got a little channel starting, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to make... Essentially what I'm going to do, boys, is break down the topics that we discuss here into shorter, bite-sized bits. Not everyone does have 3-4 hours to listen to all of our shit.
Yeah.
So I'll break it down into smaller bits, just kind of summarize the topics, and then hopefully people can listen in to get the bigger story. So that's what I'm going to try and do at the moment, because I understand some of the things that we discuss can be quite in depth. So if I can at least lead people down the path to want to listen to them, to flush it out a bit more, I think that'll be a good cause.
Fucking clickbait.
Not quite, but yeah, slightly.
I mean, look, people do need sometimes something a little bit more edible, right? To grow into
edible arrangements.
Yeah, I'm trying to create a funnel, essentially, for people to want to learn the bigger topics. So if I can pique their interest slightly, they'll be more inclined to want to think about the topic and then maybe even join in the discussion with their own two-piece,
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, hey, I really appreciate the three of you, not just coming up, but staying on, really engaging. I mean, I think this was super productive. People on watching, whether now or later on, I mean, look, I don't even need to say it, but I will say there's a lot of value in here. And I don't mean from me, but just everyone who contributed, all of us. So I'm going to say this last, and I've been saving this all night. Something very important. You could say dear to my heart.